Long before the night everything went wrong, I'd learned what it felt like to live in the cracks of my own family. I don't mean they were unkind. They weren't. My parents worked hard, loved us the only way they knew how, and did their best to keep things together. But growing up with an older brother like Kyle meant I was always a step behind, a shadow trailing someone faster, louder, stronger. We shared a room the size of a utility closet. Our bunk bed took up most of the space, and we were always at each other's throats, arguing about whose turn it was to use the desk, whose clothes were on the floor, who kept leaving the window cracked in the winter. When Kyle left for college, I finally felt like I could breathe in my own home. I moved my things into what I thought was my room now, rearranged it, painted one wall blue, and even patched the little dent he'd kicked in years earlier. When he came back unexpectedly after dropping out, he didn't ask for the room. He just took it. I pretended it didn't bother me, but it did. I swallowed all that resentment, stacked it somewhere deep, and let it rot quietly. Years later, when I finished college and came home during a brutal Minnesota winter with the kind of emptiness that follows you after graduation, I assumed, foolishly, that I'd get my room back. Instead, I was given the drafty guest room above the garage, a space that shook whenever the door opened. The insulation was a joke. The heater rattled like loose bolts in a coffee can, and the thin windows let the cold creep in like it had a key. That room reminded me why I hated winter nights, why silence and darkness made me twitch. When I was 10, a man broke into our house. I'd frozen behind the couch, unable to scream or run while my parents dealt with the panic. Ever since then, the sound of a door opening in the middle of the night felt like a hand closing around my throat. So that Friday night, when the wind howled against the siding and my parents were gone for a charity event and Kyle was supposedly working an overnight shift, I bundled in blankets and tried to pretend the cold didn't feel personal. Around 11:47 p.m., the garage door shook the floor beneath me. It was slow, mechanical, heavy. Not the wind, never the wind. I checked my phone, hands already shaking. A text from Kyle, sent at 11:20. Leaving for work now? Stay warm, man. So who was in the garage? I peeked through the frosted window, expecting to see his truck. Nothing. Only fresh tire tracks curving through the snow, too wide to be his. Every muscle in my body went rigid. The break-in from my childhood played in my head like a film reel. The crunch of boots, the whisper of someone rifling through drawers, my own useless breath caught in my throat. I reached for the old aluminum baseball bat I'd kept since high school. It wasn't much, but the weight of it grounded me. My voice trembled as I whispered to the 911 operator, giving her my address, telling her someone was inside. She begged me to stay hidden, stay upstairs, stay safe. But old guilt is louder than good advice. Back when I was 10, I'd done nothing. I couldn't do nothing again. I crept downstairs one step at a time, listening to the house breathe around me. A draft slid under the door frames, cold enough to sting my ankles. I followed the sound of voices, soft, low, conspiratorial, coming from my parents' bedroom. A man said, "Check the safe. They said old man leaves after 10. Another replied, "We get it tonight or not at all." My pulse became a drum in my ears. I stepped into the doorway and swung the bat at the first shape I saw. A sickening crack tore through the room as it connected with someone's shoulder. The stranger screamed and stumbled backward. The second man, a taller one in a ski mask, rushed me before I could lift the bat again. We collided hard, crashing onto the carpet. His knee pinned my chest, his breath hot through the mask. A knife glinted inches from my throat. "Should have stayed asleep, kid," he hissed. The pressure of the blade stole the air from my lungs. The world narrowed to the cold metal and the stranger's uneven breathing. Before darkness swallowed me, distant sirens cut through the snowy night like a promise. "Cops," the injured man wheezed. Panic tore through them. The tall one grabbed the other under the arm, dragging him toward the back door. Snow blasted in as they vanished into the blizzard, leaving the house ringing with their exit. I stayed on the floor, gasping, clutching my neck as though I could erase the feel of that knife. Police swarmed the house minutes later, boots thudding, radios crackling. Their flashlights carved harsh beams through the broken quiet. A young officer knelt beside me. "You're lucky," he murmured. "A few more seconds and, well, you know." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My body felt like it had been carved from ice. Kyle came home an hour later, pale and wide-eyed. He rushed inside, demanding answers, grabbing my shoulders to check if I was hurt. When the cops explained that the intruders knew the safe location, the garage code, and my parents' schedule, something flickered across his face. Guilt or fear, I couldn't tell. The officer asked him where he'd been since leaving for work. Kyle stuttered something about stopping for gas, running late, traffic on the highway. Nothing about his story was steady. I sat silently on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching his face. My mind replayed the whisper I thought I heard during the struggle. Evan. I hadn't told anyone that part. I wasn't sure I'd really heard it. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it wasn't. My parents came home in a flurry of panic, hugging me, apologizing, blaming themselves for leaving. We cleaned up shattered picture frames and dumped out drawers until nearly dawn. The house felt wrong now, violated, rearranged by strangers' hands. The police installed temporary alarms. My dad had the locks changed. The keypad code was wiped and replaced. A security company scheduled cameras for the following week. None of it helped me sleep. I returned to that freezing room above the garage, climbed into the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Every shift of the wind made me tense. Every groan of the wood frame made me choke on fear I thought I'd outgrown. Near 3 a.m., as the storm thickened and snow whispered across the roof, the floor vibrated. Slow, mechanical, heavy, like the garage door was opening again. I held my breath. I waited. The vibration faded after a few seconds, but the cold stayed, settling deep into my bones like it knew it belonged there. Some nights, even now, years later, the house still does that. A tremble through the floorboards, a groan beneath the bed, a sound that pulls me upright in the dark with my heart racing. And every time, I wonder the same question that's haunted me since that night. Is it just the wind? Or are they coming back? And worse, who will let them in? The past has a way of returning when we least expect it, and sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who open the door to danger. But courage isn't about being unafraid. It's choosing to act even when fear shakes you to your core. Long before I ever heard the first scream in Frostline Apartments, I'd already learned what it felt like to live beside violence. I grew up in a house where winter wasn't a season, but a silence. One that settled over the walls after my father finished yelling and my mother finished crying. I learned early how sound could travel through drywall like a ghost, how fear could sit on your chest, even in your sleep. By the time I turned 32, I thought I'd outrun all of that. A new town, a fresh break from a relationship that drained me, and a technical writing job that didn't demand much more from me than clarity and meeting deadlines. Newtown looked perfect when I toured it online. Snowy streets, quiet corners, apartments priced low enough for someone still piecing themselves back together. Frostline Apartments sat on the edge of the district, a rectangular brick building with narrow hallways and windows that rattled when the wind blew. I told myself the place had character. Maybe what I meant was, it was the kind of place where no one asked too many questions. The first night, I fell asleep on the couch with a frozen dinner still half thawed on the counter. Around midnight, a muffled voice pulled me awake. A man's voice, sharp and mean. A woman answered, her tone strained, words lost under the thick walls. I sat there, staring at the dark, listening as something hit the floor hard. Then another thud, then a small cry. It felt like someone had reached into my memory and pulled out a scene I'd tried to bury. I told myself to ignore it. I had moved here to heal, not reopen wounds. but healing has its own ideas. The next morning, the hallway felt heavy and stale. I passed the door across from mine, the one where the voices came from, and noticed a dent just beneath the handle. Not big, not small, just deliberate. I kept walking, pretending I hadn't seen it. By the end of the first week, the fights became routine. Every night around 10, the same voices erupted. Blake's deep, furious bark and the woman's frightened pleas muffled through drywall thin enough to breathe through. Furniture scraped. Something slammed. Sometimes I thought I heard her body hit the floor. I'd sit frozen on my couch, useless and furious at myself, just like when I was a kid hiding in my bedroom while my mother said, "It's fine, Jack. Please don't make this worse." The guilt that stayed with me for 20 years clawed straight back through my chest. Twice I called the police. Both times, the responding officers shrugged off my concerns like I was an overreactive neighbor. We knocked. No one answered. "Doesn't sound like an emergency," one of them said. "You didn't knock on the right door," I protested. The older officer sighed. "Look, sir, apartment buildings get loud. Arguments happen. Unless we see injuries, there's not much we can do." It wasn't what he said. It was the mild irritation in his voice, like I was wasting his time. When they left, the building felt darker than before. One evening, as I climbed the stairs, I noticed a smear of dried blood along the railing. Dark brown, thin, finger length. My heart kicked hard, but I walked past it anyway, shaking. I told myself it could have been anything. A nosebleed, an accident, snow melt mixed with dirt. But I'd seen enough in childhood to know what blood looks like, even when it lies. Outside, the winter storms built into a relentless cold that trapped us inside like a sealed box. People walked the halls less, talked less, smiled never. The building creaked under the weight of the wind, and with each night, the silence between arguments grew longer and more unnerving. The night everything snapped, the power had gone out across half the block. Snow pressed against the windows so thick it looked like the world had turned to static. I sat under a blanket with a flashlight, listening to the distant groans of the building adjusting to the temperature drop. Then, at 11:47 p.m., I heard a scream. This one wasn't like the earlier ones. Not angry, not reactive. It was torn from a throat. Final. Then a man's voice followed, low and chilling. "Your last warning." My stomach dropped. I stood before I could think. My legs moved on autopilot, carrying me into the hallway. The emergency lights flickered weakly along the ceiling, painting everything in a dull red glow. I knocked on their door with a shaking fist. The door swung open immediately, like he'd been waiting. Blake Rourke filled the doorway. Broad shoulders, frost-bitten knuckles, jaw set like concrete. His eyes were flat, dead, the eyes of a man whose empathy had frozen off years ago. "What do you want?" he growled. "I heard," someone screamed. "Is she—" He stepped forward, close enough that I smelled stale beer on his breath. "You ever think," he said, voice low, "that maybe you should mind your own business?" Before I could step back, he lunged. My back hit the opposite wall so hard my teeth rattled. He punched me twice, once in the ribs, once across the cheekbone. Pain detonated behind my eye. I felt my knees give. Then he grabbed the front of my jacket and dragged me across the hall like I weighed nothing. He shoved me into my own apartment, kicked the door shut, and sat me on my bed. My body curled instinctively from the pain, but he gently, mockingly, pulled the blanket over me. "You keep calling the cops," he whispered, leaning so close I felt the heat from his breath. "You keep sticking your nose in what's not yours, and I'm gonna come in here while you're sleeping, quiet as the snow." He held up my spare key, my own key, the one that had hung on the hook beside my door. "I'll use this," he murmured. Then he walked out. I stayed frozen, trembling, staring at the door even long after it shut. I didn't go to the hospital. If Blake found out, he'd know I talked. Instead, I taped my ribs, cleaned the blood off my face, and told work I had the flu. 3 nights passed where I didn't sleep at all. Every small sound turned into a footstep, someone shifting in the hall, someone trying my door, someone testing the locks he already had the key to. I taped the keyhole. I added a chain lock. I dragged a chair against the doorknob every night. Then I slept on the couch with the lights on, blanket pulled to my chin like a child, hoping the dark won't notice it. Across the hall, the apartment where the arguments used to live fell silent. Not quiet, silent. No crying, no furniture shifting, no footsteps, nothing. And the longer that silence stretched, the more I realized I wasn't hearing peace. I was hearing absence. Something had happened, something final. A month passed, then 2. I avoided Blake at all costs, timing my departures around when I heard him leave. I barely ate. I barely spoke. Even the snow outside seemed to flatten the world into something muffled and suffocating. Eventually, the fear outgrew the building. One morning, without telling work or friends or even myself what I was doing, I shoved everything I owned into my trunk, left the mattress behind stained with old blood, and drove out of Frostline Apartments without looking back once. I found a place across the district, a cleaner one, brighter halls, families who smiled at each other. But winter never softened again. Every night I checked my door 3 times. Lock steady, chain latched, chair in place. Curtains pinned shut. Phone fully charged. Knife in the kitchen drawer moved to the bedside table. I kept telling myself Blake didn't know where I lived now. That he didn't care anymore. That he had found someone else to terrify or destroy. But trauma has its own gravity. Some nights, when snow piles high against the windows and the world grows quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat, I hear it. A slow breath just on the other side of my door. Patient. Familiar. And I know Blake learned something about me that night, something I've tried to forget but can't outrun. I don't fight back. Not yet, anyway. Ignoring someone else's suffering doesn't protect you. It invites danger to grow unchecked. Courage doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it means asking for help, demanding to be heard, and refusing to let silence become complicity. Long before Newtown, before I learned how to count tremors in my own hands, my life was a series of small collapses stitched together with shame. The breakup that pushed me over the edge didn't look cinematic on the outside. A few cold sentences, a slammed door, a lifetime of things unsaid. But inside it felt like a final instruction. Erase. I tried to follow it. I crashed with my mother for months, slid from job to job, and eventually rented the cheapest winter-battered cottage I could find, because solitude sounded like medicine. Winter in Vermont has a way of carving you up and naming the pieces. I thought the silence would knit me back together. It didn't. The cottage had paint peeling like old sunburn, a furnace that coughed more than it warmed, and windows that whistled when the wind found a seam. For a while, that sound was a lullaby. Later, it became an alarm. I moved in with 2 suitcases, a mattress from a Craigslist rescue, and a particular kind of self-loathing that felt like ballast. People talk about recovery like you take 1 step forward and the ground steadies. My recovery looked like slipping on ice and choosing to keep walking anyway. I found ways to anesthetize the ache. The first time I took acid, it felt like peeling off skin. The world was tender, and I floated through music like I could unstick the past from my ribs. The mushrooms made everything bright and alive in a way that terrified me and delighted me at once. MDM. A erased my loneliness in hand-holding warmth. Then Xanax, little white pills I swallowed like promises, let me sleep through the snow and the long, loud thinking. I'd take 15-20 milligrams in a night when the cold made my chest a fist. Days bled into each other. My memory grew a foggy shoreline where I once had a coastline. One snowy night at a rundown bar, under cheap lights and fog machine smoke, I met Ethan Rhodes. He stood on a small stage, bent over a guitar, hair falling in a reckless curtain, and he smiled like he owned danger. We danced like 2 people trying to find their edges, and somehow ended up married in a roadside chapel in New Hampshire 2 weeks later. I don't have the picture-perfect flashbacks the movies promise. I have hazy Polaroids of a white dress I don't remember buying, and a ring I barely recall sliding on my finger. Marriage to Ethan was an experiment in combining two bad decisions. He had a laugh that could fill a room and a habit that filled our bank accounts and our house with chaos. Meth made him bright and then feverish. Debt collected like frost. He overdosed once in my arms and didn't come all the way back, and I left him because I didn't know what else to do. The thing about leaving is that it makes a fine scar. People can point to the line and say, "There, you healed," but inside you can still feel the fracture. Ethan died a month later from a laced injection. The funeral was a blur of faces and sympathy I didn't feel entitled to accept. Guilt is a greedy animal. It eats your good memories first. The way people whispered tragic and wasted folded him down into a neat explanation that didn't take me with it. I moved back east to Newtown looking for blankness and found company instead. Robert Hensley, Bob to everyone who wanted to pretend easy, showed up at my door because he'd been let out of his apartment with nowhere to go. He called himself Sideshow Bob and dressed, with a kind of oblivious bravado, in a collision of thrift store pieces, a floral skirt with a greasy jacket, mismatched shoes, and a smoky voice that layered his sentences with rumors. He smelled like old cigarettes and basement damp. There was something about his lanky, flailing presence that made him look harmless the first few weeks. I let him stay because loneliness makes you a terrible landlord. He said, "A week, and then a few," and the couch absorbed his life the way a sponge takes oil. He never paid rent. He never cooked. He muttered conspiracy theories about destiny and someone sabotaging him at his job. Sometimes he would sit too close on the couch and tell me, in a sing-song whisper, that we were meant to be. I'd laugh it off at first, because that's what you do when denial is cheaper than confrontation. Winter tightened its fist. The days were short and the nights were longer than a person's patience. Bob's fits escalated. Doors were slammed so hard a picture frame shattered. He punched drywall and blamed the landlord. He argued he had tenant rights because he'd been staying over for more than a month. He hovered outside my bedroom door. He called me Mayor, with a softness that made my skin tighten. The knot in my chest the night he cornered me in the kitchen is still sharp in my memory. Snow had knocked out the power. The house lit itself with slick dark and the white glare of streetlights through thick windows. He stepped forward, eyes wide, whispering, "You're mine. You can't throw me out like you did your husband." He moved like a man who believed his own delusion, and I moved like someone who knew how to run. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and felt the thing you'd expect an animal to feel when the hunter realizes the cage is opening. He fled before the cops arrived. For a while it felt like the worst part was over, but he came back. Footprints pressed in the snow outside my windows, new scratches along the back door lock, and once he tricked my friend into letting him in. She told me afterward that he'd smiled and asked for water. He grabbed her wrist, and something in the world split open for both of us. She filed a police report. We got a restraining order. Paper is thin, and people are not. The judge's words were a promise that felt thinner than the paper they were printed on. Months passed with him still in the periphery of my life. News reached me that he'd beaten another woman unconscious and tried to slit her throat after she refused him. But through some plea deal, he walked away with something less than ruin. I learned how little the law understands how fear works. It's measurable in tremors, in flinches, in the nights you spend checking doors until your hands cramp. 2 years later, I was in a grocery store under fluorescent lights when I looked up and saw him at the end of the aisle, like a stain I hadn't noticed until it was directly in my periphery. His hair longer, beard thicker, the same unsettling smile on the wrong face. I left Newtown the next morning. I packed everything into my car with hands that had learned to be precise and left before the snow could close the road. I left because staying meant a lifetime of looking over my shoulder until my neck ached. Now, older and sober, I'm getting ready to go home. It feels like admitting a scar exists rather than pretending it didn't. I have boxes labeled with sensible things, dishes, warm sweaters, a photo album that no longer numbs me when I look at it. The cottage is a memory that smells like mildew and old pizza boxes. The winter nights are a rhythm I can hear in my bones. People think recovery is about quitting substances. It is that, but it's also about rehousing yourself from inside. I rebuilt nights that weren't an arrangement of pills and panic. I learned to sleep without a sleeping pill that wipes the edges off who I am. I learned the difference between kindness and codependency. Sometimes that meant saying no and standing by the door when someone didn't leave. Sometimes it meant moving out the next day when I saw a ghost in a grocery aisle. There is a humility to packing up your life and admitting the cottage taught you something hard, that what you allow in will echo. I let people stay who shouldn't have stayed. I let memory get muffled because I was terrified of the rawness of feeling the whole thing. The cost was high, and the healing is quiet and stubborn. When I lock my door at night now, I do it slowly and deliberately. I double-check the bolt. I count the windows. I do small rituals for survival. A hot cup of something herbal, a neighbor's number in my phone, the way the curtains are tied so they don't rattle. I do it because a winter night has a way of bringing back what you thought you'd buried, and because there is dignity in guarding yourself without shaming the person you used to be. You can't outrun the past by drowning yourself in forgetfulness or people who promise to fill the void. Healing is not erasing. It's learning to keep a safer distance, to recognize danger before it lodges, and to let the small, consistent acts of care rebuild the life you thought you lost. I learned early on that silence lives differently inside a funeral home. At night it presses against the windows, sits heavy on the embalming table, and remembers things you'd rather forget. I kept the late shift because the daylight asked questions I couldn't answer: taxes, conversations with my ex that always ended in apology and silence, while nights let me tuck my life into neat boxes labeled work and go home to numbness. For 7 years at Hawthorne Funeral Services, I cataloged grief the way others sort mail, methodically, stoically. Winter always felt like a small betrayal. The building creaked more at my bones, the heater coughed, and the power would hiccup whenever snow piled on the roof. That night, the storm was coming in hard enough that the town plowed the main roads twice. That's when the call came through. The dispatcher sounded off from the start. Her voice wavered on details, said the wrong lake name twice, and left long, thin pauses where I expected instructions. "We have a potential drowning at," she started, then stopped, then tried again. "At Newtown Reservoir. We need immediate preservation. Can you?" She trailed off like someone holding their breath. "Yes, send it," I said. I don't like taking requests that aren't clear. It gives the wrong kind of room for mistakes. Still, I accepted because refusing felt like admitting I wanted to go home, and home was just a collection of unfinished conversations. The van arrived almost 3 hours late, snow-thinned headlights jerking at the driveway. 2 drivers helped unload in a flurry. A lanky man who kept wiping his hands on his jacket, and a woman whose cheeks were raw from the wind. They wrapped the stretcher in a towel soaked with a dark, syrupy liquid. I assumed lake water mixed with blood, a typical enough sight to steady me. But up close it didn't smell right. It smelled chemical and sweet, like metal left in a basement corner. "Evan, Louisa, you two got the paperwork?" I asked. Evan fumbled with a plastic envelope. Dispatcher called it in. Said it was a Jane Doe. Rushed, you know, weather's bad. His voice was thin. Louisa kept glancing down the hallway like she expected someone to be standing there. I prepped the table, slid the heat lamp into place, and told myself not to let the skim of unease spread. Routine steadies fear. The unwrap was habit. Corners first, then middle. The towel slipped from the shoulders, and my stomach dropped like a stone. This wasn't a drowning. The face was wrong, not just lifeless, but altered. Flesh bubbled like acid had kissed it. Teeth darkened and exposed in a jaw slack with something closer to fury than death. The body didn't lie in peace. It sagged as if it had been trying to hold itself in one position and failed. "That's not hers," I said. Evan swallowed. "Dispatch said." "Dispatch doesn't walk through here," I snapped. "Who identified this as the girl?" We assumed," Louisa said. The call said, "Match." Assumptions are dangerous in my line of work. They turn names into things, and things into cover. I started my report anyway, because paperwork is a kind of prayer. It keeps the world together for a minute longer. When I stepped into the hall for a break, I heard footsteps heavy and measured padding down the corridor. "Evan? Louisa?" I called. No answer. The air smelled of snow and metal. I followed wet prints to the exit where the door was ajar, and the wind had tugged at the welcome mat like an animal with a curiosity for trouble. Back inside, the room had changed. The arm that had rested at the side was now bent across the chest. The towel on the floor had inched toward the door. My hands were not steady while I checked the pockets for my phone. It wasn't there. My wallet, the little drawer where I kept my keys, empty. A low moan crept under the lamplight. I told myself technicians mess with the dead, that students did stupid things for kicks, until I turned and the table was empty. Fear is a precise thing. It makes you sharp and stupid at once. I ran to the prep room where we keep spares and called the front office. No dial tone. I tried Evan's radio. Static. The sirens outside swelled then receded, muting like someone stepping into a deeper room. When the officers finally burst in, guns drawn, half the street was a blur of red and blue through the big front window. "Charles Whitfield?" An officer barked. I nodded, throat thick. "We found a body near the river," he said. "Drowned female. But we also pulled an escaped inmate from a stolen mortuary van earlier today. Acid burns, severe facial trauma. Name's Gary Oswald. He was seen in the van headed this way." Photos came out on a small tablet, a before and after. Before, Gary's jawline matched the stranger I'd just unwrapped. The after picture was a melted mess of skin and horror. My stomach hollowed. I had opened a man who was not dead and had helped him vanish into snow and night. The drivers confessed later that they'd been rushed by a scared dispatcher, that they'd checked the paperwork with more trust than scrutiny. It was a small, dumb mercy. They hadn't meant to collude and escape, but it didn't change the fact that I had treated a living man as a corpse. I couldn't sleep for nights after. Wind had a different language now, a rhythm that matched the heavy, dragging footfalls I'd seen in my mind. I kept replaying the hospital of my choices, the towel, the unwrapping, the cold numbness that had kept me from smelling anything unusual, until it was too late. I drove past the river on an errand 2 days later because the old habit of looking at the places where bodies turned up felt like a kind of penance. A patrol car idled by the bridge. They had no leads. Gary had vanished like breath in snow. "Do you think he—" I started to ask the officer. "He knows these routes," she said. "Mortuary van, shelter of workshops, old houses. He'll turn up. People like this don't stay hidden long." There was a softness to her words that didn't reach my bones. Work continued in a system that pretended nothing unspooled. Families clutched photo frames and I pressed their hands with the professional touch of someone practiced in calm. But at night the funeral home hummed differently. My phone remained in my locker. I bolted doors I once left unlocked. I checked the rear windows myself 3 times each shift. Once, around 2 in the morning, I heard a slow, wet scraping at the base of the back door. I froze until the radio crackled with someone laughing and then silence. I began to tell stories differently. To coworkers I said I regretted not checking better. To myself I whispered that one good day wouldn't set it right. Guilt does not ask for forgiveness so much as it asks for recognition to be named and carried. I named it. I had been careless. I had been human in a way I'd prided myself on not being. Weeks folded into winter. Rumors of sightings circulated through town, a man in a heavy coat watching the river. A figure stepping between snow-laden maple trees. None were confirmed. I lived with the image of wet footprints, and the knowledge that sometimes the dead are not the ones who teach you to listen. Years later, the funeral home still smells like spice and antiseptic. I still work nights, though not for distraction anymore. The job shaped me into someone who understands the small responsibilities that carry large consequences. I know the weight of a name. I know to confirm, to verify, to hold forms like tether lines. Gary Oswald was never caught. When the snow falls hard now, it settles on the roof in gray, uneven ridges. If I stand by the window and watch the flakes gather, I think about the night a man used a towel and a story to walk free. I think about how habit can be a dangerous thing when it becomes excuse. I think about how easy it is to let systems carry guilt without inspection. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the slow dragging that night carved into me. I tell myself it's the building settling, or a branch scraping the siding. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Either way, I check the doors. I lock the ones I can. I don't let the silence in without names anymore. Duty demands attention. Small lapses in care can become someone else's escape. Respect the living by treating identifications and procedures with the thoroughness you'd want for your own. Long before Claire and I signed the papers, I'd convinced myself that moving out of the city was a simple equation. Less noise, plus more space, equals better sleep. I grew up in places with thin walls and thin patience, so when the realtor handed us the keys to the timber frame house on Winterbridge Lane, I imagined quiet winters, wood smoke in the chimney, and Claire curled up with a mug and a book. The house was 60 years old, and honest about it, floorboards that complained when you crossed them, plaster that settled like an old story. Claire loved every creak. I noticed the little practical things. Hairline cracks in the foundation, a faint smell of mildew in the attic, and odd shallow scratches near the baseboards in the closet she wanted for her dressing room. You always look for problems, she told me that first night, her breath warm against my neck as we stood in the frost-smudged kitchen. I look for solutions, I said. It felt like a small joke then. We carried boxes up narrow stairs, laughing, and pushed our luck against weather forecasts of coming snow. Winter felt like a promise. The first week was full of inventory wrapping plates, labeling books, finding where the previous owners had left the fuse box instructions. Claire discovered the growth chart markings while I was under the sink replacing a corroded pipe. She called me up the stairs, voice thin and excited. "Daniel, come see this." I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped into the attic-level bedroom she'd claimed. The walk-in closet was narrow, its wood pale where someone had sanded around old shelving. Lines of names and heights spiraled faintly across the back wall like a roster of summers. Most were weather-ghosted and hard to read, but one name, Noah, was scored deep into the wood, darker than the rest. "That's weird," I said, rationality kicking in. "Maybe the previous owners had a kid named Noah. They never mentioned one," Claire replied, but she was staring at the name in a way that made my skin prickle. She traced the letters with her fingertip. The spot where she touched felt cool. Cooler than the rest of the room. That night the first snow came hard and fast. We slept with the windows cracked against heat, the kind of sleep that makes you think anything could happen. The house breathed around us. We repainted the closet because Claire wanted a clean slate. It was a small domestic ritual. Primer, 2 coats of white, edges taped with the care of people building new lives. When we went to bed, the wall was blank and honest. In the morning, Noah's name had reappeared, darker and deeper, as if the paint had only given it a fresh skin. "You did this," she accused, half laughing and half not. "I'm not messing with you," I said. I wasn't sure I believed myself. I slept with the light on and woke to the sound of frantic scratching from upstairs. When I went to check, the closet door stood open as if someone had left in a hurry. The white paint was scrawled now, dozens of iterations of Noah across the back wall in different hands and sizes. Tiny marks overlapped in a furious, uneven pattern. The next night, Claire screamed. I ran up to find an elderly woman crouched in the closet with a broken pencil, hair frozen at the tips like frost picked her out of a photo. She muttered, eyes wide and glassy. "He's still here. Still waiting for his mother." We called the police. The woman was Margaret Wexley, a name that matched nothing in our paperwork until they pulled old records. She had been a housemaid for the family that lived here 40 years ago, and disappeared without anyone knowing where she'd gone. Police took her for questioning. She answered like a raw nerve. "I hit him good," she said under the fluorescent light of the station. "They should have told me. I looked everywhere." Her confession read like a wound. Margaret said she'd had an affair with the man of the house long ago, and that their son Noah had died killed in a fit of jealous rage by the wife. She'd searched this house for decades, she said, living in the margins of towns and barns, coming back like a shadow to press her hands against walls that never answered. It explained the outfits Claire had found under a loose floorboard, and the way Margaret knew the layout of the house without looking. "But where is he?" I asked the detective later, voice low enough not to carry. "We're searching," the detective said, "but property's that old, well, things settle. People forget where they put things. Bodies don't always tell the story." We weren't satisfied with that answer. The house, newly scanned and catalogued by authorities, yielded nothing. No bones, no hidden hollow. Still, Margaret's eyes had been desperate. She had described rooms that smelled of iron and damp and named spots I wouldn't have thought to look. The police took her to treatment and custody. For a while, the house felt hollowed out of time, but you don't erase the things people leave behind. At night, I heard tiny footsteps on the landing, too light to belong to an adult, too certain to be a draft. Once, I saw a faint handprint on the frost of the upstairs window, a child's mark, pressed as if someone had leaned close to watch the street. Claire would wake and whisper about a lullaby she didn't know she knew. In the end, the house asked the same question of both of us. What do you do when the past insists on being seen? We had bought property. Not only the roof and joists, but the inertia of old things. Grief, secrets. A life that had been buried to keep a family's reputation intact. We could have left. Plenty of people do. But leaving felt like admitting some refusal of responsibility. Like shoving the weight of that grief onto the next person who loved a house because it was pretty and cheap. On a night when the wind peeled like paper off the eaves, Claire and I sat at the kitchen table with hot coffee cooling between our palms. Margaret's voice, recorded at the station, played softly in the laptop Claire kept open. The old woman's words trembled through the speakers, a confession and a prayer. We did what they told us to, Margaret said, voice small. We believed what kept us safe. We decided to keep the house. Not because we thought the ghost would stop, but because to leave would be an easy denial. We called the Historical Society and the county coroner again. We searched the crawl spaces ourselves. Methodically, we listened for footsteps and sometimes leave the closet door slightly ajar so a small presence might pass in and out without anger. One afternoon, Claire found a tiny wooden toy tucked behind a joist in the cellar. It was a hand-carved boat with chipped paint, exactly the sort of thing Margaret had described. It didn't prove anything. It didn't stitch a wound closed, but we kept it on the mantel. Some nights the house still remembers Noah without mercy. I see the way Claire holds her hands when she sleeps, fingers curled like someone protecting something fragile. I see my own reflection lean closer to the window and feel the faint, aching sense of a life interrupted. We wake each morning with the same small bravery. We move plates, we sweep snow, we go to work, and we return. When history is hidden, it does not disappear. It waits in the cracks of rooms and the grooves of names. Owning a place means inheriting its truths, as well as its comforts. The right thing to do is not to cover over the past but to see it, speak for it, and hold what was lost with quiet honesty. I moved to Silver Hollow Ridge the way people move when everything else has already moved for them, slow, carrying only what would fit in the car, leaving rooms that still smelled of someone else's life behind. My mother's death had been a small, brutal thing stretched into too many small, brutal procedures. Funeral arrangements, signatures, boxes. After the hospital release and the last of the neighbors' casseroles, my Aunt Nora, who I'd met in fragments at holidays and in the margins of family photos, offered the Ridge House. It was easier to accept the house than the questions that came with staying in the old apartment where every sweater still smelled like her. I'd learned to notice small changes early. Instincts, I later called them. Before that, they were simply how I survived a childhood in which the person who said they loved me could shift from warmth to anger without warning. My stepfather's temper taught me to read the room like a weather report. If I smelled alcohol and heard the front door lock 2 seconds late, I left the kitchen. If a silence lengthened wrong, I pretended to be busy in another room. I carried that skill with me to Silver Hollow Ridge, like an extra sweater against weather I could never quite predict. Winter at the lakeshore was a pageant of white. The town set up a carnival on the frozen edge, luminescent tents, a band that muffled into the snow, a ring of lanterns that made the ice appear like a city skyline. I went with Oliver Pike because I needed company, more than I needed a good time. He was quiet, always tugging his camera closer to his face like it had the answers. He liked photographing faces that felt like secrets. He called it finding people who didn't want to be seen. I called it voyeurism, and walked closer to him anyway. From the first moment we stepped under the strings of light, I felt a weight on the back of my neck, the sense of eyes in places where eyes shouldn't be. I wanted to shrug it off, to get lost in the music and the smell of fried dough. But there he was, a man in a brown wool coat, standing 2 tents over like he belonged to the shadows. He didn't move, he didn't smile. He simply watched. "You notice the weirdos first, don't you?" Oliver said, breath fogging, lens up. "You mean the man who looks like he got lost in a Dr. Zhivago movie?" I said. I tried to make a joke of it, because jokes are safer than questions. He lowered his camera, glanced once, and shrugged. Maybe he's a carnival prop. When the crowds thinned, Oliver wanted to find a quieter angle. He liked long exposures, the way the camera could stitch time into light. We wandered toward the storage sheds that sat against the far edge of the fairgrounds, wind pushing our jackets flat. The man in the brown coat was there again, as if a map of our steps led straight to him. He moved that slow, careful way older men do when they're unused to cold, the coat swallowing him whole. Winter nights swallow people who wander too far, he said when he reached us. The voice was gentle, too immediate, like someone slipping a quiet note into your palm. Oliver laughed too loudly. That's a good line, he said. We'll remember that. I wanted to leave. I felt the old alarm at my sternum, a tightness like the moment before glass breaks. But Oliver was already setting up the tripod, fingers methodical. A crash behind us snapped both of our heads. Oliver's fingers fumbled the camera, and he pressed the shutter as the sound echoed. When we checked the shot, the image showed the man in the brown coat and another figure, darker than the night, standing 5 feet behind him with a shape that didn't belong. The man's smile in the photograph looked pleased in a way his face hadn't in person. Did you see? Oliver breathed. He looked younger in that light, like fear had physically shrunk him. We left, and the sound of the carnival folded away over our shoulders. I walked faster than usual the rest of the night, punching in the code on the apartment door like numbers could lock out the feeling of being watched. Over the next weeks, I kept seeing him on the corner by the school, leaning across from Nora's shop, a silhouette at the edge of the parking lot, when I creeped home late from shifts at the diner. Each time, he was the same distance, the same stillness. Oliver got quieter. He missed texts, then evenings. When he did talk, he talked about nothing but the photos, how the shadow moved closer, how the grain of the film caught things our eyes could not. It's like he knows the frame before I do, Oliver said, handing me a print of the carnival shot. The shadow in the back had blurred a fraction, like it was breathing toward the camera. We went to the police. An officer with kind eyes and cold hands told us that cold can play tricks on the eye, that cameras produce artifacts. Snow can do that, he said. Long exposures, double exposures. It's photography. Sometimes it lies. He didn't call it malice. Someone's been watching me, Oliver told me one night, voice low. He'd pulled his hair into a clumsy knot on top of his head. And not just me. Mara, it's in the pictures. It's getting closer. I wanted to force him to laugh it off. I wanted to tell him he was fine and the camera was a hobby and that the town had fewer monsters than the stories you told yourself alone. Instead, I tightened my jaw and listened. My instincts didn't need a camera to tell me when something wasn't right. They used different senses, old, low, inherited, and they did not lie. Oliver insisted on the bridge even after I begged him not to. We'll get it all, he said. Proof. Not just a smear. Not just an accident. The North Bridge was a bleak place in winter. Rusted railings, tracks fretting into the distance. The river below frozen and shouting soft crystalline noises. Snow whipped sideways. At the far end, the man in the brown coat stood like a punctuation mark, not moving until we steeled ourselves. Go, I said. Please go. Oliver took 2 frames. The flash licked a pale terrace into being, and in the light, I saw it what had haunted his photographs, lurking in the photograph like a stain. This time it was closer. An outline like a human folded in on itself. The man in the brown coat turned then, and there was no recognition in his face, only some small, pleased expression, like someone watching a plan finish. The sound of a distant freight train roared through the valley, and the man moved back until he was nothing. The rails vibrated under our boots, and when the train passed, Oliver's face was wet with snow and breath. I can't stay, he said the next morning on my porch, backpack straps tight over his shoulders. I can't be the one who makes it come nearer. He left without goodbye, and the silence he left had an edge carved into it. Time is a fragile thing in small towns. People lump danger into odd times, drunk driving, late nights but not into the quiet, polite spaces where we let our guards drop. After Oliver left, the feeling of being watched didn't stop. I saw that brown coat in windows, in reflections, half a silhouette at the line of the trees. I changed locks. I learned how to silence the house, so the small noises wouldn't trip old alarms. Nora told me once, hands on the counter, that strangers could look like maps and that some people simply didn't know when to leave. I wanted to believe that was all there was to it, but instinct has a stubborn mind of its own. When it whispers, you listen. On heavy snow nights I walk slower, keep my back to the walls, and I carry my keys like a talisman. Sometimes I think I hear steps on the porch, thin, patient, then nothing. Maybe it's the house. Maybe it's my own thinking turning fear into footsteps, but sometimes the shadow in a photograph is the only warning you get. Sometimes, danger waits until you make the mistake of thinking it won't. A quiet place can still harbor danger. Trust your instincts, pay attention to the small warnings, and protect the boundaries that keep you safe. Long before the glass warehouse and the unseasonal snow, Harper and I had been that kind of friends who fell away without drama. Two lives that ran parallel until work and distance made them drift. We texted on birthdays, liked each other's photos, kept the quieter parts of ourselves boxed up. Then, out of nowhere, she sent a message that read simply, "Art show tonight, Harbor North, midnight." I hadn't heard from her in 2 years. I didn't think twice. I wanted to see her face again. The venue was an abandoned glassworks on the edge of the waterfront, long shuttered except for the kind of pop-up exhibitions that attract people who like things to feel slightly dangerous. Snow started early that night, fat and heavy, actually sticking to the industrial panes and making the place look like a cathedral built of frost. The power flickered constantly. People with camera straps and too much eyeliner moved between installations, speaking in low voices. The art was raw fragments of mirrors, blown glass, shaped into skeletal flowers. It smelled faintly of oil and old furnace smoke. When Harper found me, she looked thinner than the photos she'd posted online. Her coat fit like she'd shrunk into it. She hugged me like someone grateful for warmth, then pulled back and checked her phone as though a single vibration could implode the world. "Sophie," she said, and her voice wobbled in a way that made me want to pretend nothing was wrong. "Hey, you okay?" I asked. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine," she said. "It's been cold." I wanted to believe her. Halfway through the exhibit, at a room full of glass sculptures that fragmented faces into geometric shards, Evan Lorne stepped into our space like a gust of too warm air. He had been Harper's boyfriend when we were both younger and reckless, volatile, charming, dangerous in a way we romanticized until the stories got darker and the wounds didn't heal. He looked sharper than I remembered, and his stare found Harper like a magnet finds iron filings. "You can't hide forever," he said, low enough that only she could hear. His hand brushed a coat sleeve, and the glint of a folding knife flashed for a second as it tucked back under fabric. Time shrank, the room warped. I grabbed Harper's elbow and the smell of her perfume made my head swim with memories bad and good, none of them helping. "Hey," I said loud enough that a barista, who'd been pulling drinks at some makeshift counter, noticed and moved to intervene. Evan didn't like that. He threaded between columns, reflecting himself in the glass over and over. And then he was gone into the snow, a silhouette swallowed by white. Harper's composure broke in the alley. She admitted she'd been getting messages untraceable, angry, sweet everything in the tone of someone who knows you and thinks they own pieces of you. "He follows me home," she said. "He leaves things on my doorstep. He waits." Her hands shook. I took her coat and told her she should come home with me. She agreed, and we filed a report with the police in the morning. They took the complaint seriously enough to pursue an emergency restraining order. It felt like a small shield. Snow kept falling. Houses blurred into anonymous outlines. The city seemed to be holding its breath. Harper's paranoia grew like a fungus, slow and ugly. Her phone buzzed at odd hours with blocked numbers. She slept in fragments and started to move through rooms as if testing them. Some nights she sat by the balcony door for hours watching the empty street, whispering the same line as if it were a prayer and a warning both. "He's not going to stop." I believed her when she said it, and I believed the small betrayals, the cheap gifts left anonymously, the feeling on the subway like someone who knew the angle of her shoulder was watching. We were cautious. We changed locks, avoided predictable routes, kept lights on. Evan filed to contest the restraining order. He vanished from the city soon after, no arrest, no trace, an odd, chilling move that made us feel as though his absence was the sort of silence that might be waiting, patient, and prepared. Then one night Harper was gone. I came home around midnight and the apartment felt too large, the air colder. Her coat hung on the rack like a promise. Her shoes were missing. The bed was unmade. On the coffee table, a single note in a careful, shaky hand. "You're safer without me. I won't let him get to you too." Her words were as much a wound as a shield. I called the police, then called her friends, then called her number until my fingers cramped. No answer. The police searched the surrounding blocks. Canvassing is a slow ritual, questions, face to face, people who remember the silhouette of someone walking at 3 a.m., and people who don't. Snow wiped fingerprints and tracks in hours. The security cameras near the loading docks were useless. The one that should have seen the alley that night froze and then blinked static at us. They found nothing. No footprints, no dropped scarf, no whisper of being taken. The note could have been left by Harper, or by someone who wanted us not to call the person who would save her, because they already had. The absence stretched and pulsed. I learned how to set my face in the mornings like a door. Before the cold hits, nobody knows what to do with grief that looks like anxiety. Friends left casseroles at the building entrance. People you hadn't spoken to since college suddenly offering to drive out of their way. We ran tips, hired a private investigator for a while, too many detectives, too few leads. Evan's name came up in every shadow. Someone saw him in a diner. Someone swore they'd seen his car on the far side of town. Headlights like searching eyes. None of it held. What stayed with me were small details. Harper's mug still sat in the dish drainer. A lipstick stain on a napkin she'd left in the kitchen drawer. Her favorite scarf folded in the closet. Things you keep because there's some superstitious part of you that thinks if you preserve them long enough, the person will walk back through the preserved life, with keys, jangling, apologizing for whatever had been dangerous enough to take them away. Years peel away like old wallpaper. The city shifted. The glass warehouse was torn down. The corner where we used to get late-night coffee changed owners twice. Sometimes, if the wind is right and the snow comes early, a memory grabs me so hard I can't breathe. Snow has a way of making sound dull and memory bright. I still walk past alleys and feel watched. I still flinch at a folding knife tucked carelessly into the wrong pocket. I still answer my phone at any hour, heart in my mouth, because the idea of missed calls and blocked numbers has taught me that alerts can be rescue or threat. We never learned exactly what happened to Harper. The police closed the active investigation after they exhausted leads and time an archive label that reads, cold. That word is a knife with no handle. I have dreams where she opens the front door and says, sorry, the line was bad, or I didn't want to wake you. Sometimes I imagine her laughing, the old Harper who drank coffee too strong and swore at buses, and then I wake and the quiet is a wall. I have kept a ritual. Each winter I leave a cup of coffee by the windowsill where we used to watch the snow. It's a superstition dressed as habit, a way of saying I remember and will not forget. Helping a friend, I learned, does not always mean you can prevent harm. It means you hold a place for them in the world and try to make that place safer. It means you run toward a person shaking, call the police, change the locks, apply pressure where pressure matters. It also means you live with the fact that the world is sometimes cruel, that the choices of other people can erase the answers you want like tracks in a blizzard. I still answer messages from numbers I don't recognize. I keep an extra blanket in my trunk and a flashlight on the kitchen counter. I teach myself to listen for the things that signal unease, a hesitation in a friend's voice, a score of texts with no return, an insistence that it's nothing when everything points the other way. I do this not because it will always work, because it won't, but because the alternative is to numb up and let a friend wander into silence alone. Love is not enough by itself. Action is. When someone you care about is hunted, gestures of comfort must be paired with firm, practical steps, documentation, support, escalation, and persistence. Protecting someone requires both heart and strategy, and even then outcomes can be beyond our control. The truest kindness is to stay, to keep looking, and to insist the world take notice. People talk about childhood like it's this warm, nostalgic haze. Bike rides, summer storms, the glow of a TV left on too late. But when I think back to being 14, I always land on one night in Briar Hill Ridge, a night that scraped something out of me I never got back. My parents were away at a company retreat that weekend, a rare overnight trip. I had begged them to let me stay home alone. I wasn't a rebellious kid, just a stubborn one who wanted a taste of independence. They agreed on the condition that every door stayed locked and I answered their calls every hour. I kept my end of the deal. At first, I ordered takeout around 6 p.m., running downstairs barefoot with a controller in one hand. The delivery guy handed me the bag, made some awkward small talk about the weather, and left. Excited to get back to my game, I shut the door with my elbow and rushed upstairs without checking the lock. That mistake still echoes in my memory, like the click of a safety being switched off. By 9 p.m., the house was dark except for the glow of my monitor. Rain tapped faintly against the siding. I was mid-match, headset on, when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of my front door opening. Slowly, quietly, like someone trying not to be heard. At first, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. The house was old, always settling, always creaking. But then came footsteps, heavy ones, measured, pressing down on the wooden entryway with deliberate weight. I froze. My hands hovered over the keyboard. My heartbeat drowned out the game's audio. Someone was in my house. I yanked off my headset, every muscle in my body vibrating. I wanted to move, to hide, to do anything, but fear pinned me like a nail. The footsteps drifted through the living room, stopping between pauses like the intruder was studying the layout. Then they started up the stairs, one slow step at a time. Creak, creak, creak. And that was the moment I realized I had never locked the front door. My bedroom door was cracked open barely an inch, just enough for me to see the hallway carpet and the faint glow of the nightlight I kept plugged in outside my room. As the footsteps climbed, that small sliver of space became my entire world. I held my breath until my lungs ached. The only thing louder than the intruder's steps was the thud, thud, thud inside my chest. They reached the top of the stairs and stopped. I watched a long shadow stretch across the hallway floor, bending toward my door like a hand reaching for me. The figure stood just out of view, silent, listening. I swear I could feel him, like the air itself tightened. My phone was on my desk, too far to grab without making noise. My parents were miles away. The closest neighbor was 3 houses down. I'd never felt so small. After what felt like forever, the figure took a few steps forward. That was when I saw him, just a silhouette, tall, thin, wearing something dark. He paused directly in front of my room. I could see the outline of his shoulders rise and fall, as if he were breathing deep, steady breaths. He didn't try the door. He didn't speak. He just listened. I clapped a hand over my mouth to smother a gasp. I didn't dare blink. Then, without warning, he turned. He walked back down the hall, still slow, still deliberate, descended the stairs, and moved through the house with the same eerie calmness he'd entered with. A moment later, the front door clicked shut. Quietly, politely, like he hadn't just shattered my childhood in 20 minutes. I stayed in my room for almost an hour, shaking so hard I could barely stand. When I finally crawled to the window, I saw nothing outside. No car, no movement, no sign he'd ever been there at all. But he had been, and he knew I lived there. When my parents got home the next morning, I didn't even wait for them to walk through the door. I ran straight into them, shaking, crying so hard I could barely breathe. They called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived, looked around, and confirmed what I already knew. No forced entry, no broken windows, nothing stolen. Which meant what happened wasn't a robbery. It was something worse. It's possible he thought the house was empty, one officer said. People check doors occasionally. You may have scared him off by being home. But I knew better. He hadn't run. He hadn't panicked. He moved through the rooms like he was mapping them out, like he was preparing. My mom called it a misunderstanding. My dad promised they'd install better locks. The police suggested leaving lights on. None of it made me feel better. For weeks, I slept with the lamp on. I kept my door locked. I flinched every time a floorboard groaned. I refused to be home alone, not after dark, not even for 5 minutes. But the worst part was the question gnawing at me every night. Why didn't he come into my room? He could have. He was right there. Nothing stopped him. Sometimes I wondered if he was waiting for something. That night wasn't meant for anything violent. Maybe he just wanted to know the layout to see who lived there, to check for alarms. Maybe he planned to come back. That fear followed me like a second shadow. A month later, strange stories began circulating around Briar Hill Ridge. Mrs. Holloway, the elderly widow down the street, reported seeing a man standing in her backyard around midnight, motionless, facing her kitchen window. The Petersons' doorbell camera caught someone walking up to their porch at 3 a.m., turning the doorknob, then walking calmly away. 2 teenagers said they'd heard footsteps in their detached garage. Every story sounded like mine, quiet, careful, deliberate. But no one else had seen the figure inside their home. Only me. I kept thinking about the way he walked up the stairs, the confidence, the patience. He wasn't scared of being caught. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't stealing. He was observing. Whenever I mentioned this to my parents, they'd exchange nervous looks, insisting it was all in my head. People scare themselves after something traumatic, my mom said. You're safe now. But I never felt safe again in that house. Not after the night someone stood outside my bedroom, breathing in the dark. By spring, the neighborhood incidents stopped. The police never found anyone. Life slowly returned to something that resembled normal. But I didn't. Even at 14, I understood that the world could shift in one quiet moment. Safety wasn't permanent. Locks weren't guarantees. And danger didn't always announce itself with shattered glass. It could enter through a door you forgot to secure. Years later, when I left Briar Hill Ridge for college, I still checked every lock 3 times. I slept with a heavy flashlight by my bed. I kept my phone within reach. Some nights, especially when I'm overtired, I swear I hear those footsteps again. Slow, deliberate, climbing toward me. I wake with the same cold sweat I felt at 14. The intruder never returned, at least not to my knowledge. But sometimes I wonder if that was the plan all along, to walk the house once, learn the layout, count the bedrooms, confirm the occupants, and wait for a night when things were even quieter. A night when no teenager was accidentally awake upstairs. And to this day, I don't know what stopped him from opening my door. But I've never forgotten that he didn't knock. He didn't break in. He simply walked in. Because I left the door unlocked. I never thought a town this small could swallow someone so easily. But Harborview did just that. After relocating for work, well, more like scraping together enough for rent near the coast, I realized that quaint seaside charm often hides empty wallets and overcharged apartments. That's when I found the boarding house on Seabreeze Lane. The faded white clapboard structure looked like something out of a sepia photograph, with windows that had seen decades of salty winds and a porch that sagged slightly under the weight of history. The ad promised cheap rent, and when I called, Mrs. Rennick answered. Her voice was soft, lilting, like she'd been trained to soothe children and grown-ups alike. "I just like having young people around," she said. "It keeps the house alive." I moved in the next week. At first, the place was exactly as she described. Cozy, warm in a brittle sort of way, and smelling faintly of salt and wood polish. The floors creaked underfoot, and the curtains swayed gently, as if breathing with the ocean breeze. But within days, I noticed odd things. My door, which I was certain I'd locked, would sometimes be ajar. My toiletries moved just enough to make me question my own memory. And Mrs. Rennick, well, she seemed to appear in the hallway at odd hours, always quietly observing, always smiling. She brought me tea each night, a calming herbal blend she called sleep tea. I refused politely, saying I preferred water, but she insisted. "It helps," she said softly. "And it's better for a young mind to rest fully. Don't you want to be at your best?" Her questions started small. What time I woke, what I ate, but escalated. She asked if anyone checked on me, if I had family nearby, who I called when I felt alone. I told myself she was lonely, that perhaps she'd lost someone dear and just wanted company. But the sense of being watched began gnawing at me. One night, I woke to a faint electrical hum coming from behind the wall just above my bed. Curious, I pried at the wallpaper. Beneath it, I found a small circular opening, with wires disappearing downward into the darkness. My stomach turned cold. Someone had been listening, and it wasn't the first time. The hum persisted, low and insistent, like a heartbeat under the floorboards. Over the next few nights, I began hearing footsteps beneath my room. They weren't the random creaks of an old house. They were deliberate, slow, and careful, as if someone was positioning themselves directly below me before stopping for long stretches of time. I confronted Mrs. Rennick one evening, my voice tight with unease. "Mrs. Rennick, are you in the crawl space?" She smiled, that soft, gentle smile, the kind that made you doubt your own fears. "Oh, Jonas, the house has old bones that shift at night. It's nothing to worry about." I didn't believe her. I started staying up late, listening, straining to catch the faint noises. Sometimes I would catch shadows moving beneath the floorboards, or hear faint clicks that sounded mechanical, like switches being toggled. When she was out one afternoon, I decided to investigate the basement. The staircase was narrow and steep, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight from the small window at the bottom. Behind an old storage door, I found a bank of dusty monitors. My breath caught. Each screen displayed a different room in the house, all live feeds. I saw tenants' rooms, their routines, and then months of recorded footage. Tenants who had long since moved out were on those monitors. People Mrs. Rennick insisted never lived here. I stumbled back up the stairs, my heart hammering. That's when I noticed my door was already open. And there she was, standing there with a folder in her hands, my name written neatly on the tab. "You've been curious," she said, her voice as calm and melodic as ever. "Curiosity is natural, but the house keeps its order best when everyone follows its routines." I backed toward the hall, panic rising. "Curates compliance?" I managed, my voice shaking. She tilted her head slightly, eyes soft but intent. "Yes, Jonas. Tenants stay safest when they follow the rules. It's simply a matter of harmony." I realized then that she had been watching me from day one. My routines, my movements, even the nights I stayed up late. She knew them all. "I want to leave," I said, voice trembling. She smiled. "The front door locks automatically at night. The others never learned to listen either. But you have the potential to learn." My pulse raced. I backed into my room, trying the door. It was already locked from the outside. She stepped closer, the folder in her hand like a quiet threat. She spoke softly, almost as if she were sharing a secret. "It's easier when you understand the house. No one needs to be hurt." I realized that escape meant deception. I had to outthink her, to act calmly while panic clawed at my chest. I feigned interest, asking questions about the other tenants, about the routines, trying to gauge how she managed everything. She answered, ever so gently, yet every word reminded me of the power she had over everyone in that house. By nightfall, I knew I couldn't wait for morning. The longer I stayed, the less chance I had to leave unnoticed. I waited until she went out to check the mail, slipping quietly from my room. I crept to the bathroom window and tested it. It opened. The window led to a narrow ledge, then to the ground below. Heart pounding, I climbed through, cutting my hands on the wood frame. Once outside, I ran barefoot across the damp lawn, my shoes abandoned in my room. The streetlights blurred as I sprinted, lungs burning, adrenaline propelling me down Seabreeze Lane toward the safety of the main road. I didn't look back. 2 days later, news came that the boarding house had burned in a sudden electrical fire. The fire department had no clue how it started, and Mrs. Rennick was gone. No one saw her leave. I never returned to Harborview, unable to shake the memory of her soft voice, her constant watchfulness, and the way the electrical hum seemed almost alive. Even now, Months later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, convinced I hear it. The faint, low hum behind my bedroom wall. The sensation that someone, somewhere, is patiently waiting to tune back into my life. I moved to a small apartment far inland, where the salt air couldn't reach me and the creaks of old houses weren't constant companions. I tried to bury the memory, but it follows me in the quiet moments, the faint humming of electricity, the feeling of eyes watching, even when I know no one is there. I can't look at boarding houses the same way again, or rent that seems too good to be true. The lesson is imprinted. Sometimes kindness masks obsession, and some offers of shelter come with unseen costs. Even though she's gone, I still double-check my doors, and sometimes I press my ear to the walls, half expecting that faint hum. I know it's paranoia, logically, but the fear is a reminder that control can hide behind gentle words and soft smiles. I survived Harborview, but part of me knows some lessons are never truly escaped. Not every offer of kindness is genuine. Trust your instincts, question unusually perfect situations, and remember that vigilance is as important as gratitude, especially when safety is at stake. Moving to Rivergate was supposed to be a fresh start, but I quickly realized that fresh start doesn't make people like you overnight. My parents had transferred jobs, so I was suddenly in a town where everyone already had their friends, their routines, and their reputations. For me, it was about survival, blending in, keeping my head down, and not drawing attention to the fact that I'd just moved here. I spent my first week at Rivergate High observing, watching how kids clustered in predictable groups and laughed at jokes I didn't understand. That's when I met Trent in math class. He had that effortless charm, the kind that makes people want to follow him without thinking twice. He leaned over my desk one day and whispered, "Hey, you new here, right? Don't worry, I'll show you around." His smile was confident, unshakable, and just the right amount of friendly to make a new kid like me want to trust him. By Friday, Trent came up to me with Jackson, another kid from bio. "Hey Caleb," Trent said. "Me and Jackson are going to hang out by the park after school. You in?" The words sounded harmless, casual, but for me it was an opportunity, a way to finally feel included. "Yeah, sure," I said, trying to hide how relieved I felt. After the final bell, I met them at the trail entrance near the river. The light was fading quickly, casting long shadows between the trees. The air smelled damp, earthy, the kind of smell that comes before a storm or a riverbank flood. Trent led the way, and Jackson followed silently. I glanced around. Something felt off. The trail didn't lead straight to the park. It curved into overgrown paths, deeper into the trees. Aren't we going to the park?" I asked, my voice tight. "Shortcut," Trent said casually, his tone too calm. "Trust me, you'll see." The deeper we walked, the more isolated it felt. The city noise faded, replaced by the crunch of fallen leaves and the low hum of the river. My stomach twisted with unease, but I forced it down. Making friends in a new town was hard. I didn't want to seem paranoid. I didn't want to be the kid who says no. But instinct has a way of whispering truths you try to ignore. The trail grew darker as dusk fell, the last orange light disappearing behind the trees. Jackson lagged a little, murmuring something about wishing he had a flashlight. I nodded quietly, my eyes darting between shadows, trying to convince myself the growing pit in my stomach was just nerves. "Almost there," Trent said again, but this time his voice didn't sound like reassurance. It had an edge, a subtle pushiness. I realized he hadn't answered why we weren't seeing the park. We rounded a bend, and there it was, the old pump station. Rusted metal doors hung crooked, and weeds pushed through cracked concrete. Moonlight glinted off broken glass scattered on the ground. 4 older teens were standing in a loose circle, faces hidden by hoodies. They were strangers to me, but they didn't move like they were surprised to see us. They moved like they were waiting. Trent stopped abruptly and turned toward me, his grin suddenly sharp. "So Caleb," he said, voice low, "you've been talking about my sister, huh?" I froze. What? No, I don't even know your sister. Bullshit, Trent snapped, stepping closer. The others closed in behind him. Their shadows stretched over me like predators surrounding prey. My chest tightened, my pulse spiking. One of them swung a broken bottle. It grazed my shoulder, slicing through my jacket and scratching my skin. Another reached to grab me, trying to drag me behind the metal shed. I twisted violently, adrenaline kicking in, breaking free for a split second. "Run!" Jackson shouted, though I barely noticed him anymore. My legs carried me before my mind could catch up. Branches clawed at my jacket, roots caught my shoes, but I kept moving. Blood from my shoulder dripped down my arm. Every sound in the woods was amplified, the snap of a twig, my ragged breathing, the footsteps pursuing me. I didn't stop until I burst into the streetlights of a residential area, gasping, bleeding, and terrified. My hands shook so violently I could barely dial 911. When the dispatcher answered, my voice cracked as I tried to explain what had just happened. By the time police arrived, I was sitting on the curb, my shoulders stinging and my entire body trembling. They took my statement, carefully writing down every detail I could remember. Trent's voice, the older teens, the pump station, even the broken bottle. An officer, Detective Alvarez, looked grave. "You're not the first kid this has happened to," he said quietly. "This spot along the river is known for initiation videos. Older kids lure younger ones here, beat them up, film it, then post it online." I swallowed hard, nausea twisting my stomach. Why would anyone do that? Power, fear, attention, Alvarez said bluntly. Some people think it's a rite of passage. There's no excuse, Caleb. We're reviewing footage from other attacks to see if Trent's group matches any known incidents. I thought back to Trent, his smile, his calm confidence, how easily he'd led me here. That smile had been a mask. That calm had been a lure. The sick realization hit me. The entire night had been planned. Not opportunistic, not random. Me, specifically. "Has anyone seen him at school?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Alvarez shook his head. "He's gone. Transferred? Suspended? Unknown. We're checking." The more I thought about it, the heavier the weight became. Trent had known exactly how to push me to trust him, exactly how to lead me down a path that ended with fear and pain, and I hadn't questioned him, not at first. I kept replaying the trail, the twisted trees, the way the pump station appeared like a trap already set. My chest tightened every time I remembered the older teens closing in, the bottle swinging. It wasn't just a scare, it was deliberate. After that night, Rivergate felt smaller. Every alleyway looked threatening. Every friendly face had a shadow lurking behind it. I avoided Trent's usual lunch table, avoided the trail near the river, avoided anyone who seemed too confident or easy to follow. My shoulder healed, but the memory didn't. It was in every reflex, my hands tensing on doorknobs, my ears listening for footsteps when I walked home. Sleep was restless. Every dream had me running through dark woods, always one step behind, always pursued by shadows with empty eyes. The police eventually traced some footage from previous attacks. Other kids had been lured to the pump station in the same way, filmed, and released into the dark afterward. They were lucky to get away. Some weren't. I realized something terrifying. Trent hadn't just been a bad influence. He was a guide, a decoy, someone meant to push me toward a trap I would never forget. And the worst part? He could have come back any day. I talked to my parents about moving again, but they wanted me to stay. I told my counselor at school, but without Trent or the others, there was little anyone could do. I was left with the lesson, the fear, and the memory carved into my mind. Rivergate High looked the same. Students laughing, classrooms buzzing, but I knew better. Beneath that normalcy, traps waited, and predators could wear the friendliest smile. Months passed, but the memory of that night never left. Trent vanished from school the following week. No one knew why. No one asked me questions beyond what the police had recorded. I walked past the river trail only when absolutely necessary, keeping my backpack close, my keys ready. I learned quickly that danger rarely announces itself. Predators don't always scream. Sometimes they smile, joke, invite you along. Sometimes, the scariest things wear the most familiar faces. I eventually found a small group of friends I could trust, ones who respected boundaries and didn't push me into blind decisions. I stayed cautious but not paranoid, remembering that experience every day. Even now, when someone seems too friendly, too insistent, or too perfect in their timing, I feel the old adrenaline spike, the echo of running through woods, branches scratching, blood staining my sleeve. The night taught me that trust is precious, and sometimes saying no, really listening to that little warning inside, is the only thing standing between you and real danger. Not everyone who appears friendly has good intentions. Trust your instincts, question sudden familiarity, and remember that hesitation can save your life. I grew up on the rural outskirts of Pine Hollow, a place where nearly everyone knew your name but still minded their own business. Our town had one gas station, one diner, and a school bus system that ran on hope more than schedules. Some mornings the bus was 15 minutes early, other mornings 20 minutes late. You learned not to panic. You just stood at the end of your driveway and waited. Back then, my house sat at the end of a long dirt road lined with pines so tall they swallowed the sky. The mornings were usually quiet. No cars, no neighbors, just the crunch of frost under my sneakers and the strange stillness right before sunrise. It was a stillness I'd grown used to. That winter morning in 2014 felt no different at first. The air bit at my skin, my breath rose in little clouds, and the darkness had that heavy blue tint that only comes with freezing dawns. I pulled my hood tighter and kept my backpack close to my chest. Then I saw the headlights coming. They were too dim, too low, and too slow to be a regular car. I thought it had to be the bus, even though the glow looked off. The beams spread strangely across the road, like the bulbs were old or dirty. I didn't think much of it. Late bus, weird bus, didn't matter. But when it finally rolled into view, my stomach tightened. It wasn't yellow. It was a pale cream color, almost sickly looking in the cold morning light. The metal siding was dented along one side, and the bus number near the roof was scratched so badly it was unreadable. The windows were dark, too dark. The bus hissed to a stop in front of me, brakes squealing like they needed replacing 20 years ago. The folding door creaked open and a man leaned out. He had tinted glasses, even though dawn was barely breaking, and an expression that never changed, not irritated, not friendly, just blank. "Morning," he said in a monotone voice. "District switched routes today. Get on." I didn't move. Something was wrong. I felt it deep in my chest before I understood it. The seats behind him were completely empty. "Come on," the driver said, tapping the steering wheel impatiently. "I'm running late." His voice didn't match the situation. It didn't sound like someone who was rushing. It sounded like someone pretending to rush. I stepped backward a little. "I've never seen this bus before." He forced out a laugh, quick and sharp. "We've got new ones. Just hop in." But it wasn't new. The ceiling panels were stained. The floor looked scratched. The inside smelled like an old garage, oil and rubber and something warm and metallic. I looked toward the road, hoping maybe a neighbor's porch light would help me think clearly. No one was awake. "Seriously, kid," he said, with a hint of irritation now creeping into his tone. "Don't make this complicated. Get on the bus." My throat tightened. "What about Mr. Dalton?" I asked. "He's my usual driver." The man's jaw twitched. "He's sick today." "Mr. Dalton doesn't get sick." I said before thinking, because it was true. He'd driven the same route for 17 years and bragged about his perfect attendance. The driver's fingers curled around the edge of the steering wheel. "Get on," he repeated, slower this time. I backed away 2 more steps. Then he slammed the door, so hard the entire bus rocked, and stomped on the gas. The bus lurched forward, not down the paved road toward school, but toward the dirt trail that ran behind the woods. The same trail that passed right by my house. My breath came out in short, panicked bursts as the pale bus disappeared between the trees. The taillights flickered briefly before vanishing altogether into the darkness. I stood shaking in the cold, trying to understand what I'd just avoided. Minutes later, no more than 3, the familiar bright yellow school bus came bouncing over the hill, headlights clear, engine loud. Mr. Dalton waved from the driver's seat. "You're up early today," he said as the doors opened. I didn't answer. I kept staring down the trail into the woods, where the wrong bus had gone. I didn't tell anyone what happened at first. Not Mr. Dalton, not my friends, not even my parents. I didn't have the words yet. I just sat on the bus gripping the vinyl seat, replaying the encounter again and again in my head. By lunchtime, Pine Hollow was buzzing with news. A teacher rushed into the cafeteria with her phone in hand, whispering urgently to another staff member. Students leaned over trays of chicken nuggets, trying to listen. Eventually, the announcement came over the intercom. "Students and staff, we have been notified of an attempted abduction 2 towns over this morning. Authorities believe a stolen school bus may have been involved. Please stay in groups when walking home today." I felt the blood drain from my face. A stolen bus. My fork clattered against my lunch tray. My friend Tessa nudged me. "Hey Ava, you okay?" I nodded automatically, but inside everything was spinning. The pale cream bus, the scratched off number, the driver with tinted glasses. I didn't imagine it. Someone really tried to take me. When I got home, Mom was glued to the local news. A grainy image flashed on screen, security footage of a bus almost identical to the one that had stopped for me. Same color, same dents, same missing number. "Terrifying," Mom murmured. "They say the driver tried picking up a girl in Fairbanks County, but she ran." I swallowed hard. "Did they catch him?" "No," she sighed. "They think he's hiding somewhere rural. These backwoods go on forever." The camera panned across a map, tracing possible routes the stolen bus could have taken. One of the highlighted roads was ours. That night I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I heard the hiss of brakes or saw the blank stare of the driver behind those tinted glasses. The worst part was knowing he'd turned down the trail that passed my house, which meant he knew where I lived. For a few weeks, nothing happened. The stolen bus still hadn't been found, though police cars occasionally cruised the back roads. Mom made me wait by the front door instead of at the end of the driveway, and she watched from the window until my real bus arrived. I pretended everything was fine, but I noticed things. A cigarette butt near the tree line that didn't belong to anyone in our family. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt trail we rarely used. A feeling, heavy and tight, that someone was watching. In early spring, I woke up one night to the sound of an engine hum in the woods behind my house. I froze in bed. It wasn't loud, more like a distant idle, low and steady. I slipped out from under the covers and looked out my window. At first, I saw only darkness. Then a single faint light flickered between the trees. Not bright enough for a car, not steady enough for a flashlight, but exactly the kind of flicker cheap, aging bus headlights might make. My chest tightened. I backed away from the window and woke my parents. Dad grabbed a flashlight and walked the perimeter of the yard, but by the time he got close to the woods, the engine noise faded. He came back inside, shaking his head. "Probably a neighbor's truck," he said. But our nearest neighbor was a mile away. The next morning, I found a long scrape in the dirt trail near our mailbox. Like a large vehicle had turned around too sharply. That was when I finally told my parents everything. Every detail, every word, every warning sign. Dad called the sheriff that afternoon. Officers searched the woods for days, but the bus was never found. Neither was the man. But deep down, I knew he was still out there. He'd picked Pine Hollow for a reason. By summer, the panic in town faded. People got comfortable again. Parents let their kids bike to the gas station, and the missing bus story became another rumor older students whispered to scare the younger ones. But I didn't forget, and I didn't go near the woods alone. One humid July evening, I stepped outside to bring in a folding chair we'd left by the road after watching fireworks the night before. The sky was dimming fast, fireflies blinking near the tree line. I bent to grab the chair and froze. From far down the dirt trail, I saw headlights. Not bright yellow-white headlights like most cars, but dull, uneven, sickly colored beams that skimmed low across the ground. My pulse hammered in my ears. I stepped back toward the porch. The vehicle slowed. The hum was familiar. Then the lights abruptly shut off. I could hear gravel under tires as something large stopped moving, stopped watching, stopped waiting. I backed up slowly, hands shaking as I reached the door. I slipped inside and locked it, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break ribs. Dad came running. "Ava, what's wrong?" "I saw it," I whispered. "The bus. He's still here." Dad grabbed his flashlight and stepped onto the porch, but the trail was empty again. No lights, no sound, nothing disturbed but the dust rising off the road. We left Pine Hollow 2 months later. My parents said it was for their jobs, but I knew better. They didn't want to risk losing me to the headlights in the woods. Even now, years later, whenever I'm walking down a dark road and see a pair of headlights in the distance, my breath catches. Because part of me still expects them to flicker, to sputter, to glow that pale cream color. And I still don't know if the driver ever stopped looking for another kid standing alone at dawn. Trust your instincts. Hesitation can save your life. Not every danger announces itself loudly, and sometimes the smallest warning sign is the one that matters most. Some nights in Briarwood Hill feel colder than they should, colder in a way that settles beneath your jacket and crawls up your spine. That's what I remember most about the night this all happened. It was nearly 11 p.m. The bookstore had just closed, and I'd missed the last bus by maybe 2 minutes. The taillights were disappearing down the road before I even made it to the stop. I wasn't new to walking home. It wasn't ideal, but Briarwood Hill was the kind of college town where the worst thing you typically worried about was a raccoon tipping over someone's trash. The streetlights along Briarwood Avenue glowed a weak amber, and the sidewalks were mostly empty. Only a few bars still had music drifting out their doors. I wrapped my scarf tighter and started the 30-minute walk back to my apartment. Around the halfway mark, just past a row of older apartment buildings, I heard quick footsteps behind me. I tensed, only relaxing when a girl about my age jogged up beside me, her breath puffing in the cold. "Sorry, didn't mean to freak you out," she said, laughing lightly. She wore a denim jacket, too thin for the weather, and her blonde hair was pulled into a messy ponytail. "I'm Lacey." I told her my name, and before I realized it, we were walking side by side like we were already friends. She said she'd been ditched at a house party and didn't want to walk alone. Her cheerful energy made the dark streets feel less threatening. We joked about professors, campus drama, the awful cafeteria coffee. For a moment, it felt stupid to ever worry about the walk home. Then, somewhere behind us, a man shouted. The sound cracked through the quiet like breaking glass. We both turned. A tall figure was weaving along the sidewalk, yelling slurred threats at no one in particular. His steps were unsteady, but he was moving in our direction. "Let's just keep walking," Lacey whispered. "My aunt's rental is just around the corner. We can duck in there until he passes." I didn't question it. Not yet. But I should have, because that was the moment the night began to tilt into something I still have trouble talking about. Lacey walked faster, tugging gently at my sleeve like she didn't want to lose momentum. I kept checking over my shoulder. The man had closed some distance but wasn't quite on us yet. His shouting ricocheted off buildings, making it hard to tell how close he really was. "You sure your aunt won't mind?" I asked. "She's not home. She's visiting my cousins," Lacey said quickly. "But she keeps a spare key in this little ceramic frog by the door. It's fine. She wouldn't care." It sounded plausible. And in the moment, fear makes you accept whatever story lets you feel safe. We turned onto a side street, the kind with old Victorian homes built long before any of the modern apartments existed. The houses loomed over the cracked sidewalk, their roofs sharp against the night sky. A few porch lights glowed weakly, but the rest of the street felt deserted, too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. "Right there." Lacey pointed to a large blue house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. One second-floor window glowed with a weak yellow light. Something in my gut tightened. The rest of the house was pitch black. "Is someone inside?" I asked. Lacey didn't answer. She kept walking, her pace quickening. As we got closer, I glanced back toward the lit window, and the light blinked out suddenly. Not dimmed, not flickered, just snapped off, like someone had stepped away from it. I stopped walking entirely. "Lacey," I said slowly, "who's in that house?" She turned to me with a smile that didn't match her eyes. "Come on, don't make this weird. We just need to get inside before that guy catches up." There was pressure in her voice, not panic, urgency, almost expectation. I stepped back. "Rena," she said sharply, "don't." My heart hammered, and somehow I finally listened to the part of me that had been whispering warnings since the moment we turned down this street. "I'm not going in there," I said. And that was when everything changed. I started backing away from the porch, slowly at first. I didn't want to spook her. I didn't understand what was happening, only that the air around me suddenly felt thick and wrong. "Rena," Lacey said again, more forcefully. I shook my head. "Something's off. I'm not going inside." Behind us, the drunken man had stopped shouting. The quiet was worse. I didn't know where he was anymore. When I took one more step back, Lacey lunged. Her fingers clamped around my wrist so hard I gasped. For someone so small, she was unbelievably strong. Her nails dug in deep, and her cheerful expression snapped into something cold and frantic. "She's here!" Lacey screamed toward the door. "Open it!" The house responded. A tall silhouette appeared behind the cracked doorway, a figure standing just inside the darkness. I couldn't make out a face, just height and stillness. The door creaked wider as if inviting me in. Lacey yanked on my arm, trying to drag me up the porch steps. My shoes scraped across the wood. "Stop! Let go!" I cried, twisting, pulling, fighting against her iron grip. Her voice dropped to a frightening whisper, low and urgent. "Don't make this harder." I saw movement inside the house. The tall figure shifting, preparing. Panic detonated inside me. I wrenched my wrist hard, ignoring the pain as her nails ripped skin. I twisted, shoved my shoulder into her, and ripped free. For one frozen second, Lacey just stared at me, her expression almost disappointed. Then I ran. I sprinted down the street, tearing down sidewalks, cutting across yards, not stopping to breathe. I didn't hear the drunken man anymore. I didn't hear Lacey chasing me. All I heard was my heartbeat and the pounding of my shoes. I didn't stop until I burst into the fluorescent glow of a gas station. The cashier jumped when I slammed my hands on the counter. "Please, call the police," I sobbed. "Someone tried to take me." He didn't ask questions. He just grabbed the phone. For the first time that night, I felt something like safety. But it didn't last long. When the officers arrived, I showed them everything. My bleeding wrist, the direction I came from, the street with the old Victorian homes. My voice shook as I tried to recount the details. They exchanged looks I didn't like. Looks that suggested uncertainty. Not disbelief, but something close. One officer, a middle-aged woman named Porter, finally nodded. "Let's check it out." I sat trembling in the back of the police car as we drove to the house. The road looked different in their headlights. Less eerie, more ordinary, but the dread in my stomach only grew. "There," I said, pointing. The house looked exactly the same, except now the entire place was dark. No faint light in the upstairs window, no movement inside. We got out. My legs felt like wet sand. Officer Porter knocked on the door. No response. She tried the handle. It swung open easily. "Did you say your friend's aunt owned this place?" the other officer asked. She said that," I whispered. They swept the house while I waited on the porch. Cold air drifted out the open doorway, carrying a smell like mildew and old metal. I tried not to look at the window where the light had flickered earlier. After a few minutes, Officer Porter reappeared, her expression grim. "Rena, this isn't a rental. The house was broken into about 4 days ago. Owners live out of state. Neighbors reported seeing people coming in and out." My stomach dropped. "So, someone was inside?" "Yes," she said quietly. "But they're gone now." The other officer came up from the basement, his flashlight in hand. "You should see what's down there," he muttered to Porter. She gave me a firm look. "Stay here." They disappeared inside again. I hugged myself against the cold. When they returned, neither spoke at first. Porter finally cleared her throat. "We found blankets, canned food, evidence someone's been staying here." I waited for the rest. When it came, it chilled me more than the night air. "And there's a heavy chain bolted to a pipe in the basement." I stared at her, numb. Whoever Lacey was, and whoever stood behind that door, they weren't squatters looking for shelter. They were waiting for someone, and that someone had almost been me. The police drove me home after taking my statement. They promised to increase patrols near campus. They said they'd search for both the girl and the man. But deep down, I knew they were already behind. That house had been cleared out too neatly. Whoever had been living there knew how to vanish fast. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. For days, every corner of Briarwood Hill felt sharper. Shadows felt longer. Strangers' smiles felt rehearsed. I couldn't stop thinking about Lacey, not the cheerful girl who joked about college pressure, but the one who screamed for someone inside that house to open the door. The girl whose grip left bruises around my wrist for weeks. The girl who acted like she wasn't working alone. Whenever I replay the moment, the part that haunts me isn't her screaming. It's the expression she gave me when I escaped. That look of disappointment. Like I had ruined something she'd prepared for. Police never found her. Or the man. Or any trace of who they were. The house was boarded up again 2 days later, and students avoided that street entirely. I still walk fast when I'm alone at night. I still cross the street when someone tries to make friendly conversation after dark. And sometimes I still imagine a pair of eyes watching from the window of an abandoned house. Maybe it's paranoia, or maybe it's instinct, because you never really forget the night someone tried to pull you into a place you weren't meant to leave. I moved to Black Hill in the winter of 2011, though I couldn't tell you now exactly why. Maybe it was the rent being cheap, or maybe it was the idea of a small town where I could rebuild myself after a rough breakup. Black Hill was a former mill town. The mills shut down long before I got there, leaving behind rusted water towers and smokestacks like crooked tombstones. The locals kept to themselves. Shops closed early. Streets emptied before dusk. The entire place felt like it was holding its breath. I rented a dim little apartment above a laundromat. The walls were thin, and the air carried a constant chemical warmth from the dryers below. But it was home. I didn't know anyone, and I barely talked to my neighbors. but I figured that was just part of getting by here. One night, after a long shift at the grocery store where I bagged cans and cereal boxes for customers who never made eye contact, I missed the last bus. I decided to walk home down Black Hill Road, a stretch of cracked asphalt lined with shuttered storefronts and flickering street lamps. The cold was brutal, bone-biting, like the kind that reminded you winter wasn't playing around. Halfway down the road, while I was blowing into my hands for warmth, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see a girl around my age. She had a frayed parka, hair tucked messily into a beanie, and cheeks red from the cold. She smiled easily, too easily for someone walking alone at night. "Cold out, huh?" she said, falling into step beside me. "Yeah," I replied, grateful for human company. "You live around here?" "Just up the road," she said brightly. "I'm Rena." She talked casually at first: weather, work, what I was doing in Black Hill, but slowly her questions turned strange. "Do you live alone? Do your parents check on you often? Does anybody know where you are tonight?" I laughed it off, thinking she was socially awkward or just trying too hard to make conversation. But that uneasy prickle in my spine began to grow. Then a drunk guy across the street yelled something unintelligible at us. Rena grabbed my arm. "Come on," she said urgently. "We should hide at my place." Before I could protest, she tugged me toward a shadowed street where a single old Victorian house waited in the dark. The Victorian stood halfway down the block, tall and crooked like it was leaning away from the wind. Most of the windows were boarded up, except for one on the second floor where a dim yellow light flickered. I hesitated. Nothing about the place looked lived in. "You sure this is your house?" I asked. Rena nodded, still clutching my arm. "Don't worry, it's warmer inside." The front door creaked open before we even reached it, as if it had been waiting. Inside, the warmth she promised wasn't there. Instead, the air smelled like damp wood and sulfur, sharp enough to sting my throat. The wallpaper peeled in strips. The floor groaned beneath us. "Sorry about the smell," Rena said, but her voice sounded off, lower, like she was forcing a tone that didn't belong to her. I heard something upstairs. Movement. Slow. Dragging. Rhythmic, like someone pulling heavy feet across old floorboards. "Who else lives here?" I asked, my heartbeat picking up. Rena smiled, but the smile was wrong. Too wide, too practiced. "Someone who wants to meet you," she answered. Before I could react, I heard the click of the door behind me. She'd locked it. I took a step back. "Hey, look, maybe I should just go." "You're already here," she said softly. Her eyes didn't blink. "He gets hungry when the cold comes." The dragging upstairs grew louder. A tall figure appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a stained sheet. Limbs too long, spine bent at a crooked angle. Something underneath the sheet moved slow and deliberate, like parasites shifting under skin. The figure swayed once, then began its descent. Rena whispered to it, her voice tender, coaxing like a caretaker calming a sick child. "It's okay," she murmured. "He's here." Fear finally hit me like a fist to the chest. I didn't wait. I bolted into the kitchen, shoved the back door open so hard it cracked, and ran jumping fences, sprinting across yards, breath burning my lungs until I hit the main road. I flagged down the first car I saw with frantic bangs on the window. They let me in. I didn't look back. The next morning, I did the thing horror movie characters never do. I called the police. I wasn't about to let whatever that thing was stay out there. When the officers arrived, I explained everything. The house, Rena, the smell, the figure on the stairs. They didn't laugh. They gave me that look cops give when someone sounds traumatized but possibly unstable. I insisted on leading them to the house. When we turned the corner onto that quiet street, my stomach dropped. The house was gone, burned to the ground. The fire department was still spraying down blackened beams and collapsed walls. The place was a smoldering skeleton. The officer beside me raised an eyebrow. "You sure this is where you were last night?" "It was here," I said, but my voice cracked. "It was right here." The fire chief overheard us and walked over. "That place caught fire around 4 a.m., he said. "Old wiring, probably, but nobody's lived here in hell 20-30 years. I shook my head. "No, there was a girl, Rena, and something else." The chief gave me a pitying smile. "Kid, this house didn't have electricity. It's been condemned since '92. I felt the ground tilt under my feet. "How could there be a light?" I whispered. "I saw a light." The officer shrugged. "Could have been squatters." But I knew what I saw wasn't a squatter. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the long limbs under the sheet, the way Rena's voice shifted, the way she had asked if anyone knew where I was. By morning, I convinced myself it had been adrenaline, cold, exhaustion. Maybe I'd hallucinated some of it. But deep down, I knew better. A week later, I walked home from work again, this time taking a different street. As I passed a broken street lamp, my breath caught. A girl in a frayed parka walked just ahead of me. She didn't turn around. She didn't have to. I knew it was her. After that night, I changed my schedule. I refused to work, closing shifts. I avoided the old roads. I tried to act normal around my coworkers, but paranoia had sunk into me like a cold that wouldn't leave. Still, Black Hill had its way of pulling people back into its shadows. One night, during a power outage, I stood on my apartment balcony listening to the silence. No hum of dryers, no passing cars, just the hollow quiet of a town that seemed eager to hide its secrets in the dark. That's when I heard footsteps below. Soft, slow, familiar. I leaned over the railing. A figure stood on the sidewalk, frayed parka, hood up, hands in pockets. Her face was hidden, but her posture told me everything. It was the same tilt of the shoulders, the same stillness. "Rena?" I whispered before I could stop myself. The figure looked up. Not quickly, just a gradual lift of the head, like someone waking from a long sleep. The hood slid back slightly, revealing a pale cheek and a hint of dark hair. Enough for recognition, not enough for comfort. "How did you find me?" I asked. Her voice floated up to me, soft as frost. "You left before he could finish." My stomach twisted. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Her smile appeared too wide, just like in the house. "You don't have to. I can come up." As if on cue, the building's side door creaked open. Someone or something was inside. I backed away from the balcony, heart pounding. The lights were still out. The hallway was pitch black. My only thought was to get out. I ran down the stairs, ignoring the sound of slow, dragging steps above me. When I reached the ground floor, the lobby door burst open as if pushed by a strong wind. Rena stood there, closer than ever. "Come back," she said. "He's still hungry." I shoved past her and ran into the street. My breath froze in the air as I sprinted without direction, just needing distance, any distance from her. When I finally stopped, gasping, she was gone. But Black Hill wasn't done with me yet. I couldn't keep running from something that wasn't alive, not in the normal sense, anyway. After a week of no sleep, no appetite, and no peace, I knew I had to confront the place where it all started. Black Hill Road. When I arrived, the street was as silent as the night I met her. Half the lamps were dead. The wind carried that metallic smell that reminded me of the burned house. I stood at the empty lot where the Victorian once stood, now just frozen dirt. "I know you're here," I said, my breath clouding. "Just tell me what you want." A soft crunch of snow behind me. Rena stepped into the light, or what little light there was. Her parka looked older now, more frayed, stained by ash. Her face was pale, eyes dark and hollow, but not hateful. Just empty, like she'd been waiting. "You left us," she whispered. "You ran. There was something in that house. He needed someone." Her voice trembled like a child arguing with a parent. "He needed warmth. He needed life. You were supposed to stay." I shook my head. I didn't owe him anything. Her expression warped sadness, twisting into something sharp. "You owe times me asterisk." She stepped forward, and the air chilled around me. Something behind her moved tall, crooked, shifting under a sheet that wasn't really a sheet anymore, but skin stretched thin. It reached toward me. I ran not away, but toward the brighter street where cars passed. I heard her voice behind me. "You can't run forever." Maybe she was right. Maybe some things follow you no matter where you go. But that night, I made it out of Black Hill for good. To this day, when I walk alone and a street lamp flickers out, I check the shadows ahead, because sometimes, just beyond the circle of light, I see a girl in a frayed parka walking one step in front of me, and I never follow. Not every friendly face means safety, and not every invitation deserves trust. When something feels wrong, listen to it. Your instincts may save your life long before logic does. I used to tell people Maple Ridge was the kind of town where even the shadows felt friendly. Small enough that everyone knew the local dogs by name. Quiet enough that the loudest thing after 9 p.m. was the convenience store's humming sign. I moved there when I was 20, after a messy breakup and a restless feeling I couldn't shake. My mom used to say I'd been born walking too fast, always chasing something I couldn't see. By 24, I had settled into a routine that felt safe, maybe too safe in hindsight. I worked evening shifts at Hearth and Honey Bakery, a warm little brick building that smelled like cinnamon and rising dough even on its worst days. My boss, Julie, trusted me to close most nights. I liked being the last one out, cutting the lights one by one, hearing the ovens click as they cooled, locking up and stepping into the quiet street with the leftover warmth still clinging to my clothes. My apartment was a 30-minute walk away. Most nights I didn't mind it. The streets were well lit, lined with maple trees that made the whole place glow orange in fall. I listened to podcasts or just let my thoughts wander. Maple Ridge felt familiar enough that danger wasn't something I thought about. That was the privilege of small towns. You didn't realize how easy it was to feel safe until suddenly you weren't anymore. That October had been strange, though. Rainier than usual, darker. People talked about break-ins a few towns over, but nobody paid it much mind. Not until the SUV. I first noticed it on a Wednesday night, the kind of night when the rain came down in thin, icy lines that made everything look blurry. I saw an older brown SUV drive by slowly, like someone searching for a house number. I didn't think much of it. People got lost all the time. Google Maps failed all the time. But when it came back again, same speed, same dim headlights, I felt something tighten in my stomach. By the third pass, I convinced myself it was probably nothing. Just a stranger who didn't know the area. Now I wish I had listened to that instinct. I wish I had trusted the unease curling like smoke in my chest. Because that night, Maple Ridge stopped being the place where shadows felt friendly. It became the place where I learned how quickly safety can slip through your fingers. The SUV slowed beside me with a soft hiss of wet tires on asphalt. I stopped walking, pulling my hood back so I could actually hear him. Rain slid down the man's rolled-down window, dripping onto his arm. He looked middle-aged, maybe early 50s, with a baseball cap pulled low and two bright eyes that didn't match his shaky voice. "Sorry, miss," he said. "Do you know where Willow Creek Lane is? GPS keeps sending me in circles." There was no Willow Creek Lane in Maple Ridge. I'd lived there long enough to know every street, but he sounded so anxious, so earnestly confused, that I stepped closer without thinking. "Let me see your map," I said, leaning in. That's when I heard it. A click behind me, soft but unmistakable. The back door unlocking. I turned just in time to see the door crack open and a second figure move inside the vehicle, a hooded shape, face hidden, body crouched like he'd been waiting. The passenger yelled, "Now!" Everything inside me snapped awake. I stumbled back, my foot slipping on wet pavement. The hooded man lunged from the back seat, grabbing for my arm. His fingers scraped my jacket, tightening, and I twisted violently, nearly falling. "Let go!" I screamed, the words tearing out of me raw. I don't know how I slipped free. Panic made everything jumbled and frantic. I bolted into the nearest narrow alley without looking, my shoes slamming against puddles. The rain was loud enough to swallow their footsteps, but I could hear them anyway, the scrape of boots, the low curses, the frantic shuffle of two people chasing something that almost got away. My lungs burned, my heart stuttered. I jumped, grabbing the lowest rung of a rusted fire escape ladder. My wet fingers almost slid off, but I wrapped my arms around it and held on like my life depended on it, because it did. Hands clamped around my legs, nails dug into my ankles. I kicked, connecting with something soft, a stomach, maybe a face. The man grunted. "Pull her down!" someone yelled. I screamed so loudly my throat felt like it split open. I screamed until I could barely breathe. The rain, the struggle, the echo of the alley, everything blurred together. Then a new sound cracked the night open. A garage door slamming up, and a man's voice furious and close. "Hey, get away from her." Footsteps thundered. A mechanic in grease-stained overalls came rushing out, holding a metal tire iron like he'd been waiting for a fight. My attackers scattered so fast I heard one slip in the mud. The SUV screeched off a second later, fishtailing into the night. I didn't let go of the ladder until the mechanic pried my fingers loose. The mechanic's name turned out to be Rick Dalton, owner of Dalton's Auto and Tire. I had passed his garage 1,000 times, always noticing the neon open sign glowing in the window when I walked home late. I never thought I'd end up crouched on the oil-stained floor of his shop, shaking uncontrollably while he locked the door and grabbed a heavy flashlight. "You hurt?" he asked, crouching beside me. My legs," I stammered. "I think they scratched me. I don't know." He handed me a clean towel from a drawer. "Use this. You're soaked." I pressed it to my face, trying to breathe. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Rick turned off the loud heater overhead so he could hear better. Outside, the rain slammed against the asphalt in a violent rhythm. "What happened?" he asked gently. I told him everything, my voice breaking more than once. When I reached the part about the back door opening, Rick swore under his breath. "They've been doing something like this in towns south of here," he said. I heard customers talk about it. Same type of SUV. My stomach dropped. "So they've done this before?" He nodded grimly. "And they'll keep trying until they grab someone." He grabbed his phone. "I'm calling the police. You stay right here. No one's getting near you again tonight." The officers arrived in less than 10 minutes. Blue lights flashed across the puddles outside. They took my statement twice, first in the garage, then again in the cruiser while I tried to stop shaking long enough to remember the details. Brown SUV, older model. Dented left side. A man in a baseball cap. A second man in a hood. "We've had similar reports in Pine Brook and Sandville," the officer said. "Always more than one offender. Always looking for women walking alone." Hearing it said so plainly made everything feel sharper, realer. By the time they drove me home, it was after midnight. Rick insisted on following behind in his truck until I was safely inside my apartment. When I locked the door behind me, the silence hit all at once. Heavy, suffocating. I showered until the water ran cold, washed mud off my legs, and stared at the faint bruises forming around my ankles. "Evidence," the officer had said, as if the proof wasn't already carved into my memory. I crawled into bed fully clothed, every light on, the sound of the SUV's skidding tires replaying in my mind. Sleep didn't come. Not that night, not for many nights after. The next morning, Maple Ridge felt different. Not the streets, not the trees, not the storefronts, but me. I felt split open, like the version of myself who used to walk home with earbuds in didn't exist anymore. Julie, my boss, hugged me so tightly I almost cried. "You're taking a week off," she said, no arguing. Her hands were shaking when she let go. The police called asking for more details. I tried to remember license plate fragments, but all I could recall was mud splashing up the side of the SUV and the sound of the door unlocking. My mom drove 3 hours from the city to stay with me. She cleaned my apartment like fighting dust could fix what happened. My dad kept checking the locks, the windows, the back door, then checking them again. Every few minutes, one of them would ask, "Are you sure you're okay?" And I didn't know how to answer. The truth was, I wasn't okay. I jumped at every car engine outside. At night, I slept on the couch facing the door, too afraid of my own bedroom. I walked fast, head down, keys between my fingers like claws. One evening, a week after the incident, I went to Dalton's Auto with a box of pastries to thank Rick. He took one look at me and said, "You holding up?" I shrugged, trying. He wiped his hands on a rag. "You want me to install a camera outside your building? I got extra equipment." I stared at him. "Why would you do that?" He shrugged. "Because you deserve to feel safe, and because if they come back, I want them caught." Something in me softened, like a knot loosening. "Thank you," I whispered. That night, I realized something important. Healing wasn't about pretending I wasn't scared. It was about building a life that fear couldn't control. I signed up for a self-defense class. I bought a personal alarm and pepper spray. I asked the bakery to adjust my schedule so I wouldn't walk home alone in the dark. My parents helped me install new locks and cameras. I was still scared, but scared didn't mean powerless. It meant I had survived. Something meant to break me. Weeks passed. Leaves fell. The rain slowed. Maple Ridge started to feel familiar again. though never the same as before. The police never found the SUV. They suspected the offenders were part of a group moving between towns, striking when the streets were quiet and the victims unsuspecting. The kind of criminals who relied on routine on women like me feeling safe. One night, I walked past Dalton's auto and saw Rick closing up. I stopped to say hi. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You headed home?" he asked. "Yeah, but I won't walk it alone anymore." He nodded approvingly. "Good. Smart." I hesitated before saying, "Do you ever think about that night, the way it happened so fast?" "All the time," he said. "But you fought like hell. That's why you're still here." His words stuck with me. Life slowly stitched itself back together. I returned to work. I stopped waking up breathless. I took walks during the day, listening to the rustle of leaves without flinching. I didn't erase the fear, I learned to live beside it. One afternoon, a teenage girl came into the bakery. She recognized me. News had spread. Small towns talked. She asked quietly, "Is it true? Did something almost happen to you?" I nodded. She swallowed hard. "My mom says I shouldn't walk alone at night anymore." She said, "You're the reason." I didn't know whether to feel proud or sad. Maybe both. Before she left, I said, "Tell your mom she's right, and tell her you're not being dramatic, you're being smart." She nodded and squeezed her phone tighter. That's what stayed with me, the idea that what happened to me changed more than just my life. It changed the town. It made people look out for each other. It turned silence into awareness. I still think about the SUV. The sound of the door unlocking. The rain hitting the street as I ran. But I don't think about it with the same shaking fear anymore. I think about how I lived. I think about how I refused to be taken. And I think about how even on the darkest nights, someone can burst through a door with a tire iron and remind you that there are still good people in the world. Safety isn't about paranoia. It's about listening to your instincts, protecting yourself, and trusting the people who step up when danger finds you. Bad intentions can hide behind friendly voices, but courage lives in every choice we make to stay aware, stand strong, and speak out. Long before that night at Harper's house, before the police tape and news vans, I used to believe old lakefront homes were charming. I grew up in a regular 2-story suburban place, the kind where every room smelled faintly like detergent and last night's dinner. So anytime a friend had a house with history creaky floors, antique portraits, rooms no one used, I treated it like a novelty, something cool, something different. Harper's house was all times of that. Her family owned one of the oldest properties on Lakeshore Drive, a massive Victorian with a steep roof and 3 full floors, not counting the unfinished attic. The place had been in her family for generations. Her parents traveled often for work, leaving Harper in charge as long as she followed 3 rules. Asterisk, asterisk, no parties, no unlocked doors, and absolutely no one upstairs. Asterisk, asterisk. Naturally, on the weekend they flew to Boston. She broke all 3. I didn't even want to go at first. I'd had a long week at my landscaping job. My shoulders were stiff, my eyes heavy. But Harper insisted, said she needed someone calm around in case the night got chaotic. That was her way of complimenting me. So I showed up just after 9, carrying a 12-pack I'd probably take most of back home. The place was already buzzing. Music echoed off the old walls, and laughter spilled down the hallways. People danced in the living room beneath chandeliers, older than everyone in the house. The 3rd floor was blocked off with a velvet rope Harper stole from a school theater set. Like that was enough to curb curiosity. It's not a joke, Harper told me early in the night. My parents freak out about those rooms. A lot of antiques, some expensive stuff. They made me promise no one goes up. "And your solution," I said, "was a rope?" She shrugged. "A rope and your responsible energy." I laughed, shook my head, and by midnight stepped outside for air. The lake wind was sharp and cold, but refreshing after the packed living room. I leaned against the back railing, staring at the still water. That's when I looked up. A figure moved across the 3rd floor window, slow, deliberate, unmistakably human. At first I told myself I imagined it. Someone downstairs had walked under a light, maybe a reflection, maybe a shadow. But then the figure passed the window again. Taller than anyone I knew, walking with intention. My stomach dropped. Nobody was supposed to be up there. I stepped back inside, heart starting to beat harder, and went to find Harper. "Someone's upstairs," I told her. "I saw them in your parents' window." Her face fell. "No one should be up there." "Exactly," I said, and without thinking too long about what we were getting into, we headed for the staircase. The staircase to the third floor was tucked behind a narrow hallway, barely wide enough for both of us. Each step creaked under our weight, the sound swallowed by the thump of music from below. Halfway up, the temperature changed, the kind of cold that didn't feel natural for late summer. Harper hugged her arms. "My mom always says this floor doesn't heat right," she whispered. "Something with old vents." "Yeah," I said. "Let's go with that." We reached the landing where a small nightlight glowed weakly, illuminating walls lined with dusty picture frames. All old family portraits, stone-faced men in suits, women with braided hair, no one smiling. Typical Victorian relics, but the kind that made the air feel heavier. Harper pushed open the hallway door. It groaned loudly, and the sound echoed way too long. Her parents' bedroom was the first door on the right. The door frame was carved with delicate ivy patterns, something her great-grandfather designed, according to a story she'd once told me. Tonight, the door was cracked open about 3 inches. Harper's voice thinned to a whisper. "I didn't open that." A draft of cold air drifted from inside the room. It wasn't the normal type of cold, it felt like opening a freezer. I stepped forward before she did. "Rowan," she warned. "I'll just look," I whispered. "If someone's messing around, we'll send them back down." I nudged the door with my foot, expecting a party idiot to jump out laughing. Instead, the room was dimly lit by moonlight pouring through tall windows. The curtains swayed slightly, though the windows were shut. The antique dresser drawers were open, clothes everywhere, and a man stood there, tall, shoulders hunched, wearing a dark hooded jacket. His back faced us as he rifled through a jewelry box. When he turned, the faint light hit the mask covering his face, a white cloth tied behind his head, eyes cut out unevenly. He didn't speak, didn't yell, just stared. My breath vanished. Harper grabbed my sleeve. "Hey, we're calling the cops," I blurted, my voice cracking. You need to go." The man tilted his head like he was studying us. Then he lifted something in his right hand. The metallic glint caught the moonlight. An ice pick. "Back up," Harper whispered urgently. We stepped away. He took one step toward us. I felt the air shift, felt something primal telling me to run. But he didn't attack. Instead, without a sound, he darted past us, almost brushing my shoulder, disappearing down the staircase with impossible speed. "Go!" I yelled, grabbing Harper's arm. We chased after him because instinct is stupid and doesn't think things through. But by the time we reached the kitchen, the back door swung open, banging in the wind. The man sprinted into the woods behind the house. Gone. Just gone. Harper stood frozen near the back door, trembling. "Rowan. He was in my parents' room. He went through their things." I know," I said, trying to catch my breath. "Call the police. Now." Her hands shook so badly she could barely unlock her phone. I grabbed it gently and dialed for her. The dispatcher's calm voice felt unreal against the chaos inside my head. While we waited for officers to arrive, we made our way back to the living room where music still blared and people kept partying as if nothing upstairs had happened. The contrast made everything feel surreal. I shut the music off. "What the hell, Rowan?" someone yelled. Harper raised her voice. "Everyone, get downstairs. Now. This isn't a joke." People grumbled, confused, but the sight of her face shut them up. They gathered in the foyer just as the first police cruiser pulled up the driveway. 2 officers came inside, and Harper immediately burst into explanations. "He was tall," she said. "Hooded jacket, white mask. He was going through jewelry. My parents' room, 3rd floor. He had a weapon." The officers asked us to guide them upstairs. I went with them. Harper stayed downstairs with the group. My hands felt numb the whole walk up. In the bedroom, the officers inspected everything. Open drawers, scattered clothes, the creaking window, the jewelry box lying on its side. One of them said, "You're lucky you 2 weren't hurt. This guy's been hitting lake houses for the past 2 months." "What?" "Lakefront burglaries," he said. "Always top floors. He breaks in early." usually before dark, and hides. Waits for homeowners to leave or go to sleep. Never hits the main level first. Wants time. The thought chilled me. He was here before the party even started? Almost definitely, the officer said. Probably watched all of you arrive. I scanned the room again, the shadows, the corners, the closet door still slightly ajar. A wave of nausea hit me. What about the mask? I asked. Does that match? He wears different coverings, the officer said, but the pattern is the same. Tall, male, slim, quiet, starts upstairs, leaves fast, never caught. I didn't like that answer. Downstairs, people whispered nervously as more patrol cars arrived. Harper hugged herself, pacing. She looked worse every passing minute. He could have been here for hours, she murmured, watching, listening. I didn't disagree. The police stayed for almost 2 hours. They took photos, dusted for prints, collected the fallen jewelry box, examined the back door latch. They asked Harper a long list of questions. When the rope went up, how many guests were invited, whether she locked every door before the party began. I could tell she was embarrassed to admit half of it, but shock does strange things to people. It rearranges priorities fast. When the officers finally left, clearing the scene, the house emptied faster than it filled. Cars peeled out of the driveway. Some people muttered apologies, others didn't say a word. By 1:30 in the morning, the place was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I sat on the couch rubbing my temples. Harper dropped beside me, legs pulled to her chest. He was, just times standing times there, Rowan. Her voice cracked. Going through my parents' things like it was normal. He wasn't normal, I said. That wasn't some bored teenager. Why the ice pick? She asked softly. Because it's quiet, I said before thinking. Doesn't make noise like a gunshot. She flinched. Sorry, I sighed. I shouldn't have said that. No, you're right. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders. I can't stop thinking about him being upstairs before we got there, just hiding, listening to everything, watching us walk around like idiots. I swallowed hard. If you hadn't sealed the stairs, people would have wandered up. And maybe gotten hurt, she whispered. God. She leaned her head on my shoulder, exhausted. The house felt too big, too empty, too old. Every sound pipes shifting, wood settling made us both tense. You staying here tonight? She asked. No, I said. And you're not, either. She looked at me like she wanted to protest, but didn't. Okay. We packed her a bag, shut every light off, and locked up. When we stepped outside, the lake was calm again, the forest still, too still. I checked the woods one last time before we drove off. I could have sworn I saw movement between the trees, a tall silhouette, then nothing. 2 days later, I got a call from the detective assigned to the case. I expected updates, maybe news about fingerprints or security cameras. Instead, he asked if he could meet at Harper's house. When we arrived, he was already waiting on the porch. The air smelled like rain, and the lake breeze tugged at his coat. We found something, he said, upstairs. My stomach tightened. He led us to the 3rd floor again. The bedroom looked cleaner now. Harper's parents had returned and restored everything to their liking. But the detective didn't stop there. He walked to the far end of the hall, to a storage room none of us had reason to open. We inspected this room after you left, he said quietly, and found evidence the intruder stayed longer than we first thought. He flicked on the light. In the corner behind stacked boxes sat a small pile of items, an empty water bottle, food wrappers, a crumpled blanket, and worn footprints on the dusty floor. He camped out here? I asked. At least a day, the detective said. Maybe more. The wrappers are from a convenience store about a mile from here. Harper covered her mouth. He could have heard everything, she whispered. Our conversations, our voices, everything. He was waiting for an opportunity, the detective added. Possibly planned to come down later in the night. So when we caught him, I said slowly, we interrupted him. Yes, the detective said. You did. We left the room feeling smaller than when we entered. As we stepped back into the hallway, sunlight filtered through the tall windows, but the house still felt cold. On the drive home, Harper sat quietly, staring out at the bright blue lake stretching beyond the road. Rowan, she finally said. Yeah? If you hadn't looked up at that window. I didn't let her finish. I know, I said, but we did. That's what matters. She nodded but didn't look relieved. Not really. Because some truths don't leave you with comfort. Sometimes the scariest part isn't the break-in, or the chase, or even the threat itself. It's learning how close danger was before you ever realized it, how long it watched, waited, listened, and how easily it can happen again. Evil doesn't always break down the door. Sometimes it slips in quietly, unnoticed, and hides in the spaces we assume are safe. Always trust your instincts, protect your boundaries, and never mistake familiarity for security. Awareness is not fear, it's survival. I still remember the way Ridgewater looked the first time I drove into town back in August of 2008, fog hanging low over the pine trees, the old mill by the river humming like it had a heartbeat of its own, and students hauling boxes across the campus lawn while parents yelled reminders they'd forget by the next day. I was 18, unsure of who I was supposed to become, but convinced college would hand me some kind of blueprint. Instead, it handed me Miles. He lived across the hall in a dorm that smelled like old carpet and ramen. The first week of classes, he knocked on my door holding a burned CD with a skull drawn on it in Sharpie. "You ever heard Ash Chapel?" he asked. I shook my head. "Then tonight, your world changes." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. The band wasn't mainstream, more like something whispered about at parties by guys who spent too much time on obscure forums. Industrial metal mixed with eerie chanting, the kind of music that felt like it crawled under your skin and stayed there. Their imagery was even worse. Soot-covered masks, church ruins, bonfires that made the flames look hungry. Miles treated it all like scripture. At first, I laughed it off, writing him off as just another college kid trying on a personality. We all did that at 18. But the more time I spent around him, the more I noticed things that didn't feel like a phase. He kept his room dark, curtains always closed. He collected newspaper clippings about abandoned churches. He scribbled strange symbols in the margins of his notebooks, shapes that looked like crosses bent the wrong direction. One night while we walked to the dining hall, he stopped under a street lamp and said, "People think the world ends with explosions. It doesn't. It ends when we forget what's sacred." I didn't know what that meant, but I nodded anyway, uneasy. By October, he had pinned a massive map to his wall dots, marking burned churches across Europe, connected with red thread like some twisted pilgrimage route. I joked about it being serial killer decor, but he only smiled and said, "Some things need to burn before they can be rebuilt." I should have taken that seriously. I really should have. By winter break, most freshmen at Ridgewater were figuring out who they wanted to become. Miles, however, seemed to be shedding who he'd been. His hair grew long and matted. He stopped showering regularly, muttering that cleansing the body was a lie invented by corporations. He barely went to class. He disappeared for hours, sometimes whole nights, into the woods behind campus. I asked him once, "Dude, what are you even doing out there?" He looked at me, eyes glassy, voice almost reverent. "Listening," he said. "The forest still remembers." The more Ash Chapel he listened to, the more he talked about their lead singer, the one arrested years ago for burning down a church in Finland. Fans treated the incident as if it were a holy text, calling it the purification. But Miles talked about him like a prophet. "People called him unstable," he said one night while we sat under the flickering dorm hallway light. But prophets always sound insane to the deaf. That set off alarms in my head, but I didn't know how to confront him. He was my friend, or at least the first real friend I'd made away from home. I told myself he was going through a phase, that he'd snap out of it once classes got overwhelming. Except he didn't. Around February, he invited me to what he called a listening session in his room. When I walked in, the lights were off. Only the glow from the map on his wall lit the space. Burned church ruins, red yarn lines, circled towns like he was waiting for something to happen at each of them. "Sit," he said. I did, mostly because the air between us felt fragile. He played an Ash Chapel track I hadn't heard before, long stretches of distorted chanting, almost like people praying backward. When it ended, he stared at me, waiting. "Well?" he said. I shrugged, creepy, but "It's just music." "No," he whispered. "It's a call." I should have walked out then. Instead, I pretended everything was fine, the way you do with a friend who's changing in ways you don't understand. But when my roommate moved out mid-semester because Miles had started standing outside his door at night, whispering lyrics, I realized things weren't just strange, they were wrong. Still, nothing prepared me for what happened in the woods. It was early April when Miles knocked on my door and said, "Tonight's important. You need to come with me." Normally I would have refused, but there was something in his voice, urgent, shaky, that made me uneasy. I told myself I'd go for an hour and head back before midnight, just long enough to make sure he wasn't doing anything dangerous. We walked into the woods behind campus, deeper than I'd ever gone. The air grew colder, the trees thicker. My phone lost service. Every instinct told me to turn around. "Where are we even going?" I asked. "To a gathering," he said. "A real one. Not like those fake concerts." He pushed through a curtain of branches until we stepped into a clearing with a decrepit shack leaning sideways like it was ready to collapse. A small group stood around it, faces hidden behind soot-smeared masks. No music, no bonfire, just silence. I whispered, "Miles, who are these people?" He smiled like a proud parent. "Devotees." Before I could ask anything else, two masked figures dragged someone out of the shack, a terrified freshman I recognized from my econ class. His hands were tied. His voice broke as he begged, "Please, let me go. Please." My stomach dropped. This wasn't a ritual. This was something else, something dangerous. One of the masked figures handed Miles a torch. He turned to me and whispered, "Tonight we purify the weak, like our founder did, like we're meant to." I backed away. "No, Miles, this is insane." He stepped closer, torch extended. "Prove your devotion." I ran. Branches whipped my face, roots caught my feet. I heard them behind me, dozens of footsteps, masked breathing, whispers sounding like warped prayers. Let him burn. Purify the weak. Return him to ash. I sprinted until my lungs felt like fire, but they kept coming. I didn't stop until the first rays of dawn hit the treetops. By then, their voices had faded into the woods, swallowed by daylight. I made it back to campus barefoot, bleeding, shaking so hard I couldn't speak. I didn't go to the police. I didn't tell anyone. I was 18, terrified, and convinced nobody would believe a story about masked cult members in the woods. But the nightmare was far from over. For days after, I avoided the woods completely. I skipped classes. I slept with the dorm door locked and a chair jammed under the handle. Every shadow felt like someone watching. Every passing footstep sounded like masked breathing. I kept expecting Miles to show up, but he didn't. Not that week, not the next. 2 weeks later, the campus lit up with police cars. Rumors shot through the dorms like wildfire. Someone had burned down the shack deep in the woods. Firefighters found a body inside. I knew before anyone said it. It was one of them. Or maybe it was the freshman they dragged out. The police never released the name. They kept saying, "Unidentified male, likely accidental." But I knew better. That shack had been part of something awful. Something that wasn't meant to be found. The worst part? Miles' side of the dorm had been cleared out overnight. Clothes gone, posters gone, map gone, like he'd never existed. The RA said his parents had withdrawn him for medical reasons, but when I tried calling his number, it was disconnected. He was gone, vanished without explanation. I lay awake for nights wondering if he burned the shack himself, or if the others turned on him. Eventually, I packed my things and dropped out. I didn't tell my professors. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I got in my car and drove, until the campus disappeared behind hills and trees. For years afterward, every bonfire smell made my hands shake, every industrial metal beat made my stomach twist. And every night, when the house settled and pipes groaned, I swore I could hear distant chanting those same backward prayers. I tried therapy. I tried ignoring it. I tried convincing myself it had been an overreaction brought on by stress and fear. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had been one choice away from becoming ash in that shack. Years passed. I built a new life across the country, new apartment, new job, new friends. Nobody knew about Ridgewater, the shack, or the torch Miles handed me in the dark. I told people I left college because of financial issues, easier than the truth. But every so often, something pulled me back. A news article about a burned church, a missing student rumor on an obscure forum, a message board thread discussing Ash Chapel's hidden gatherings. Each time, I felt my heartbeat spike, memories flickering like flames. One night in 2016, while scrolling through a music forum, I came across a post titled, "Whatever Happened to the Ridgewater Chapter?" My hands trembled as I clicked. Most comments were nonsense teenagers romanticizing danger, but one reply froze me. The one who ran was lucky, the others stayed loyal. Purification requires sacrifice. No username, no profile picture, just posted at 3:14 a.m. I told myself it was trolling, just some internet edgelord. But the phrasing, the cadence felt too familiar, too close to what Miles used to say. I shut the laptop and sat there for hours, staring at the wall. Some nights now, I still dream of that clearing, the masks, the torch, the whispering voices slipping between the trees like smoke. I don't know what happened to Miles. I don't want to know.